Hello, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, and welcome to another episode of Fanalysis, Star Wars. I'm Rutty4, this is Greyjoe91.
Hello.
This is EvanNova95.
Hello.
This is Jensarai1.
Good evening, YouTube.
And this is Antoine Bandele.
Yo, yo.
Today we're going to be covering the long-awaited Revenge of the Sith, the only version that exists. Who wants to lead us up with the summary on this one?
So this is going to be part one, which for us is going from the introduction of the novel up through the chapter entitled Jedi Trap, right? That's where we're deciding to stop for today.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the reason we're doing that is because we don't want to give this novel short shrift. There's a lot of good stuff, and we have varying opinions on a lot of the stuff, so we want to discuss it really in depth. So we're doing this in multi-part. It might even go up to 6 parts, I think we said, but we're not entirely sure. But we'll be beginning with part one now. And so that starts with the introduction. Which I think is entitled The Age of Heroes, right?
Correct.
Yeah, but even before that, there's like a little epigraph. The story happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It already happened. Nothing can be done to change it. And I actually wanted to start that off because also from a previous video when we talked about the Clone Wars coming back, one of Matt's critiques was that it's already a foregone conclusion. And I wanted to propose to you, why is it that something like Revenge of the Sith works for you while something like The Clone Wars returning and getting its final season doesn't quite?
Why does it work for me? Like, why does
assuming
Why does this
works
work
for you,
but not Clone Wars? Is what he means.
Because
it was a question that we had someone in the comments as well.
Because this is the end of a story, or that unless they're trying to make it like add on to it, that can't be like an alternate end. Like that's just going to be ancillary information. Maybe it'll say what Ahsoka was doing during this time, but for me, it doesn't answer. It can't answer any questions that I have. All of mine are answered, I guess.
Okay, that makes sense. Because for me, like if I were answering that too, is that like you were saying before, this one has more finality to it, in the sense that, yes, we know what the journey is. And even like the way this book is presented is like, yeah, we know what this conclusion is going to be. But it's about seeing like what the machinations of, that tragedy happening.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Like overarching, like, why is this like satisfying even though I know how it ends? Oh, okay. I misunderstood the question. I was doing like a versus thing, like this versus the Clone Wars.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. Why does this, I guess because this is weird because the movie didn't like. That's
What are you talking about?
Well, if I may be allowed to pipe in, I think one of the reasons why is because Revenge of the Sith is a Greek tragedy where knowing how it's going to end and knowing it's going to end badly is the point, because Greek tragedy. Whereas the TCW 7th season episodes, the show's never really been willing to commit to storylines like that. They're just going to build up false hope that we know will amount to nothing.
Yeah. So are you still lost, Callan? Because like you asked a question there.
No. Sorry, what? I wasn't lost at all. No.
I thought I heard your voice saying that you didn't know what was going on. Sorry, maybe I made that up.
No, he was making a joke saying, "What movie?"
Sorry. I was just.
Connor.
Okay, that was the classic Callan humor going over my head.
Yeah, sorry.
When you have to explain a joke, it isn't
funny
anymore.
Right. But anyway,
now, Callan, you had notes about the opening that you should probably voice right now. What are your thoughts about it?
I enjoy it. Put simply, the quality of the
I love how we're on camera and then he goes like, "Oh, like that was
that was like the worst political dodge I've ever seen in my life." Like for anybody, like he just said the opening was like a big circle jerk for Obi-Wan and Kenobi.
No. Not,
yes, you did.
Not that part.
Yes,
it's not the introduction to the Age of Heroes part that I have an issue with on that one. It's further in. The actual
Oh, really?
the Age of Heroes is
totally
supposed to be the Age of Heroes is supposed to be a grandiose, over the top kind of bigging up of the entire scenario, not just those two. So I buy it there. The moment when they start talking about Obi-Wan and Kenobi together later on in the book is when it hits me. I'm like, okay,
right.
We get it. Obi-Wan and Kenobi are correct.
We'll talk about that then.
For the viewers,
But anyway, I mean,
you just post that was either brilliant, like him covering up what happened,
It was not.
Like, or he's just lying right now because like it does not match how he was talking before.
Because the circle jerk comes later. I buy the idea here because it's supposed to be this over the top thing in this particular intro, and it's also it's kind of from the perspective of the of not the audience but the galaxy at large as well. So it makes more sense.
Right.
But when you're inside their own heads, or supposedly slightly inside their own heads, I was like, this is a bit much. But we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But I think it works really well because this is a space opera, and it's great to have like the beginning of the book like set the stage of like this is big. This is a galaxy-wide conflict, and getting the insights from not just the heroes, because that's in the movies we just we get their two starfighters, they come into battle, we only have their perspective, but it's thinking about like how it feels to be someone just watching this on the HoloNet, and all these things are going down, or parents being afraid of what's going to happen, but then the kids kind of like tugging and being like, no, it's going to be okay, like the heroes are going to come, like that kind of thing. It makes it feel like it makes the Jedi feel like superheroes, like in this sci-fi context. And I think that's
it was like being it's like this first introductory chapter. It's like, and I mean this in the best possible way, it was like that day I turned on the TV way back in 91 and it was 9/11. I was just channel surfing, looking for a kids show. I'd gotten up before everyone else, gotten ready for school, made myself some breakfast, and I was just waiting for the rest of the family to get ready. And I was channel surfing, looking for a kids show. But I was just flipping through all of these news stations between each of the kids channels, and I was just noticing the same clip played over and over again of a skyscraper with a big trail of smoke coming from it. And I was like, what the hell is going on? So I stayed on one of the news stations and just watched. And Jeebus.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the feel it's trying to get across with
day.
this. Getting across the sense of just wide-scale tragedy here. It's definitely the feel you feel for it. I also want to make note of the fact that with the parenting thing, you said, all the parents thing, you said about how they're talking to their wives and husbands and children, Antoine. I love how the detail of... Yeah, precisely. I love the detail of, crush mates and trios and spawn, and I like how there's a reason the term younglings exist, and it's because children doesn't quite fit the bill when you're talking about a galaxy-spanning, galaxy-spanning... people.
And he does that really well throughout, like actually inserting, because in the same, some authors that do Star Wars insert Star Wars references just to be like, look at me, I'm getting credit that I know Star Wars, but the way he does it, it serves the story or the purpose of whatever he's trying to do in that sentence or paragraph. It's never, I mean, there are a few times where it's like, okay, that's a little bit too much.
Yeah, I was about to say, there are a few examples where it isn't sometimes. But it's rare.
But
it is
usually
rare.
It's a brilliant
it's
example.
Never overdone. Yeah.
It's a brilliant example of how Matt Stover is able to make the more absurd aspects of the Star Wars universe so palatable by presenting them in this mundane way, because that's exactly what it is. It's like if you're talking to a race of fish people, well, of course they're going to have completely different lifestyles and they're going to have different evolutionary tracts and growing cycles because they're fish people, not humans.
That's actually one aspect I like about one of Stover's other works, Luke Skywalker and the Shadow of Mindor, which, when Luke basically has to jump ship from his X-Wing and he's taken in by these natives, and he kind of describes him, he's comparing their culture to kind of like what the rebels briefed him on, and it's really interesting how he kind of plays up that dynamic. So he is really good at that. Sorry, decided to throw that out there.
I always like diving into that diversity of the galaxy, because you don't get to see it very often.
Yeah, they're very true. And that's something I know, Matt, you like a lot, is like always making sure that it's not just humans.
I really wish that they would make like a Star Wars movie that's centered around like a non-human. Not that that's ever going to happen. I mean, they can't even make human characters interesting to me at this point. But anyway, I'm just saying.
On the subject of Stover in his writing, is that like even from the start, he always makes, I think, very deliberate and very good and effective choices. And the first choice that he has here is that he's writing in present tense. And going forward, he kind of has this weird switching of third person limited, but he's switching from people's heads like within the context of the scene, and that's really hard to do. And he does it relatively seamlessly throughout the book, but it's great. Like it's an immediate conflict that we want to feel, like the sacking of Coruscant. So he uses, let me go present tense, because that makes everybody feel like, and not overdoing it, because we feel like sometimes people like they use whole novels and do that, but having it in just this little vignette, I think is very, very effective.
Yeah, it has its place. And when you're trying to pick up like a news broadcast style intro, it definitely works for that.
Yeah. Well, this whole sequence really much. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Good.
I was just about to say this whole sequence overall kind of really reads to me almost like it's being broadcast like through a radio or on a television screen.
Yeah, it could be like it could be like it reads so. like in like World War II or whatever. Like the president would be giving like fireside chat or whatever, trying to figure like talk to the nation about like what the situation is. This could, if Star Wars didn't have like the tradition of opening with like an opening crawl, like explaining what the situation is. This, I think, would have been a great companion piece to the famous shot in Revenge of the Sith where you see the Jedi Star Cruisers or Starfighters coming in. And it's like that long shot with them entering the fray. If this being like the message that was conveyed, like not only to the galaxy, but to the audience, I think people would care more. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because there's a sense of majesty here, like the way that he describes this, that I don't think goes overboard. I think it really helps sell not just that there's a common belief in the legend of Anakin and Obi-Wan, but a desire to believe in it. It's comforting. And I think that that's very real. And when you talk about Star Wars as a franchise, George Lucas himself, in my opinion, used it as like a shield. He would describe it as a kid's franchise or a kid's story. I think it can be. But the story at itself is so timeless and the setting's so rich, I think it's absurd to limit the potential it has just to kid stories. And I love the child or youngling perspective and the adult perspective, neither being right or wrong. I love that blend because to me that's a microcosm of Star Wars appealing to all ages, and just how they're affected by looking at this. I love it.
It's a microcosm of reality, full stop. When you're talking
One
about
hopes
the idea
that
of
was
heroes
intentional
and legends, and it's that sense of optimism v cynicism, and how it applies to a world at war. It's very, very
and what's great
stuff.
is they even work that cynicism into past events. Like they just specifically note that one of the reasons a lot of the adults are more hesitant to trust the Jedi is because people like Sora Bulk and Deepa Balaba have fallen off and have caused mayhem throughout the galaxy. So that's one of the reasons they're not as willing to really put their trust in them the same way their children are.
Two things.
And the same thing that they have in.
Sorry, two things I liked about that.
I was going to let you go.
Sorry, two things I loved about that in particular was the fact that it's not only a continuity nod to the fact that those events happen with Depa and Sora, but the fact that as well Palpatine wouldn't let that be talked about. That's not allowed to be mentioned. It specifically makes note of that, like it's divorcing him from responsibility of spreading that kind of rumor when it's exactly the kind of rumor he wants to spread.
Yeah.
And picking up from that thread, it's also because what this chapter represents, like when you actually get right down to it and analyze the views being expressed as the views of the galactic populace, this is essentially Palpatine's roadmap for what he wants the galaxy to think and react to things. He wants them to put him up on a pedestal and see him as the savior. He wants them to see the clone armies as unambiguously good, and he wants them to see the separatists as unambiguously evil, and he wants them to start wondering about the Jedi.
And he also wants the separatists to be viewed in a certain order. Like it even says, they think Newt Gunray is treacherous and venile, but he's an Neimoidian. That's just how they all are. Paul the Lesser, he's they call him pitiless but also pragmatic, part of his character. Dooku, they have massive respect for him because of his aristocratic behavior, and they even say they respect him for his courage but mistaken convictions. Meanwhile, when it gets to General Grievous, they simply state monster. Like no extra designation, just monster.
They kind of levy all of the sins of the Confederacy on him as well. Like the whole broadcast focus with him being the one that called.
They literally, evil
the,
genius.
Yeah, the butcher of billions kind of thing.
And he's set up as the fall guy, like that's what Palpatine has him there for. Is like, oh, okay, if my whole plan goes as supposed to, like he's supposed to be the fall guy. Or no, Dooku, I think, muses about that through Palpatine.
He's told to Dooku.
Right.
But yeah, the whole thing about the being afraid of the Jedi again with the superhero thing, like coming up again, like that happens a lot in superhero movies too. It's like, yeah, they have these great power, but like it's kind of like a who watches the Watchmen kind of a thing. Like if they snap, like what are we gonna do if we put all of our faith in these people? And we've seen it happen, even though they've tried to be hush hush about it. So I thought that was very effective, and as an effective way as a prelude to what's going to be happening to Anakin.
And talking about the whole idea of Jedi snapping and going rogue, it's also a nice little referencing back to Mace Windu's statement in Attack of the Clones, which we all love, the Jedi are keepers of the peace, not soldiers. And this is actually a perfect example of that, because this is a Jedi Order that spent 1,000 years training for peacetime duties, being thrust back into a combat situation, a full-on war. Well, what happens if you take someone whose entire sense of self is predicated on this Zen Buddhist tranquility and then put him through the meat grinder? Sure, some of them, like Kenobi, will become stronger for it, but some of them will become like Sora Bulk and say, you know what? Dark side for life!
Yeah, and it's the question in everyone's mind in the galaxy of how many Jedi are going to fall prey to that. You know, they've lost confidence in them as an order.
Or already have, And the ones that make it, the ones that don't fall prey to it many times just die, because this is a war. So, I mean, it's like they're losing their best and brightest no matter how you look at it, by and large.
Specifically phrasing it to in that sentence of how we're introduced to the idea of them falling is referencing the fact that they've died or fallen. The fact that that's the lead-in for it, I love that, because it's the kind of backdrop to their fears. Yeah, there are Jedi that have been lost, but worse, there are those that are lost in an entirely different way.
Yeah. I mean, when you consider the sort of things Sora and Deepa did. I mean, it goes without saying that it is, most people would be terrified.
There are worse things than death. That's the idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that the idea of there being worse
the
things
darkness in the jungle. Sorry.
Well, it's also just the idea of the things being worse than death applying to everyone, not just yourself. Because it's like, if Anakin Skywalker died during the Clone Wars, he would have had a hero's funeral. He would have been a martyr. But him falling was just so much worse because we got Vader.
Yeah, which also totally, I think, structurally from the movies is like, it still perplexes me why we didn't get the Clone Wars on like celluloid. And
I'll never understand that.
Because that is literally the fall. Like, what really deteriorated Anakin was that, and we saw the tell element in the beginning of it, and it's like didn't
even get a montage.
And that's the thing.
Montage.
But I love that, because I don't personally do this, but I've heard people or I've read from people in forums that this opening, for the way that they describe that, like they can shed a tear, or they really do see this as a tragedy for Anakin. And it's like, I don't feel that when I just watch the movies. I can't feel that. I want to desperately, but I don't. But these books really, this one in particular, they show the potential that was in George Lucas's idea if he just had somebody else helping him execute it. It's a great framework. It's just not executed well.
It's my favorite thing about the first chapter, actually, the bigging up the weight of the loss because of what we see the two of them doing, and how they're interacting. Anakin and Obi-Wan. That's the biggest thing. Their relationship is what was so missold for me in the film. Anakin specifically, his journey as well, but the ties that he has to Obi-Wan and the bonds. That's supposed to be what really tugs on our heartstrings, and this book really helps sell that for me. It's like one of the best for that.
Right, and then it ends it very well, like the introduction that though this is the end of Age of Heroes, it has saved its best for last, so he does a really good job of tying that all together. Right.
That was a really nice ending. The pros of that, and it saved the best to last. Very cool.
That alone makes me feel more than the shot at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith.
Oh yeah,
because it helps buy into like the mythology of what like the Jedi are.
Oh man, imagine if they actually did like I don't know, maybe someone talking like in the future or something. Like, it would be really weird structurally for Star Wars, I know, but like if someone did do something like this at the start.
Yeah, sort of narrated.
It would be too erratic.
Yeah, it wouldn't work exactly, but like in my head, I feel like there's a way that they could have made something like that work. Yeah.
One could hope.
Or splicing together like different senators.
You know what?
Like
what you could do. Okay, so yeah, we're doing that. We're doing the splicing that all Star Wars fans do. Yeah. But you have the scrolls do its thing, right? And then you can have like Yoda or somebody have a voiceover maybe as the battle goes, and then you see that Yoda's maybe like on planet looking at like the battle or whatever, but he's like explaining all this kind of stuff, like in the gravity of it or something, and then you cut to like the actual action. I don't know, but like things could happen. Or could have
even entirely separate projects, just your animatics of this stuff happening with the book woven into the narration of it. There's lots of ways you could do it.
Honestly.
Yeah. But after the chapter wraps up, we get our first, dark, as I call it, darkness sequence.
Poem. They're sort of poems.
They're definitely poems, because I would say it does have purple prose to it a little bit sometimes, because it's a little bit too vague in the way you're you're getting at it. So that's the one thing I think I would say I'm not super
does
on board.
Does anyone have anything in specific they want to talk about this one? Because I do, but I'll wait in case anyone wants to.
Yeah, but it's like midway. It's the greatest of its efforts is the illusion that the dark is temporary line. But if you have something before that, we'll talk about something else.
Yeah, mine actually comes before that. I really like the line, "The dark protects us from what we dare not know," because that to me is not specific to someone who adheres to the darkness. Like that's also in my opinion, I think that's sort of true for that's like a psychological self-defense mechanism that we all do. We all need to forget about reality sometimes, in order to move forward. Even, but just us in our mundane lives. I like that line a lot.
And that's the cool thing about poetry.
The interpretation I draw from it is that it's also the thing about, like you were saying about how we all need to forget. You always need that area of unknown where you can put the things that you don't understand, so that way you have a nice little box to lock them in so they don't overwhelm your life.
Yeah, you definitely need that. I think also in a way, that's kind of like this gets more hit upon like in the actual chapter itself, but I think that's sort of the difference between Obi-Wan and many of his peers on the council is they've spent this whole war like watching things that they've fought their entire lives to either build or maintain or foster be taken from them. The thing that he's watching, that he's helped maintain is Anakin, who's growing. So Obi-Wan has something to be proud about. He's sort of got blinkers on where like the rest of the galaxy is concerned. He, the dark of the war has protected him from what he dare not know. Like he's not aware of like all the deterioration that's caused people like Mace, who's a great Jedi in his own right, to harden over the years. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's kind of what I think has allowed Kenobi to maintain that quintessential Jedi-ness that he has about him.
He is legit the greatest Jedi, of this time period. In philosophy, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to make him I don't think he's the most powerful,
he's the quintessential Jedi. Yeah, in terms of his spirituality, in terms of his relationship with the Force, everything. It's what he's supposed to be in the story when it's written well.
Yeah. Which in turn makes it all the more devastating with what happens later when his quote unquote anchor finally sinks.
You are my brother, Anakin.
That's my takeaway from that. But go ahead.
In this prose specifically, I'm a big fan of the third gift, that the dark revels in the light because it is ultimately the dark's victory. I love that it's because it allows you to look at that perspective of there is no day without night. There is no night without day. So the fact that the dark recognizes that even in its mercurial nature. It works well because I'm not a big fan of poems in general. To me, that the as you mentioned, Antoine, when it can be sometimes quite vague, I think that ambiguity tied to the dark itself is a good channel. It's the dark side
because it's so nebulous.
Precisely, yeah. Poems in their ambiguity work well with the dark side. Not that all poems are ambiguous, of course, but when it comes to this kind of prose, they often are, and I think it works well for this, especially as an establishing kind of thematic lead-in for this chapter.
Yeah, and then it kind of ends with, talking about how a victory for the light is also a victory for the darkness, kind of highlighting that symmetry and the relationship between the two aspects, which, obvious parallels to the Force itself.
Yeah, it's a great single line as well. Really good tie-in.
Do you feel like that's actually true beyond just like the narrative of Star Wars? Like, sometimes I think that might get misconstrued as someone's like, we've got to kill people, but also heal people. You know what I mean? Instead of it actually being...
It's less extreme
in terms of like
healthy balance.
That's a loaded question.
It's less extreme than that. It's about the contrast of life. You can't have joy without suffering. You can't have excitement without tedium. It's just the way the world works. It's not meant to be taken in extremes. The balance of the median is kind of one of life's greatest balancing acts. How not to take anything too far one way or the other. One of the reasons Obi-Wan is so perfect.
I agree, because it's when you start putting labels to it that it starts to get a little bit misconstrued on like what how is one equal to the other and vice versa.
It's one of the reasons Obi-Wan is the quintessential Jedi, because he gets that.
Right.
And the other problem with taking things too far is that it actually leads to a very bland, homogenized existence. It's like when you're pure and utter dark, regular darkness starts being boring, so you got to start going for uber dark. You got to get more and more extreme, and you start spiraling off into oblivion.
Eldar,
and in their own in their own way, the Jedi kind of did the same thing, but with the light. It's like they're clinging to that light, staring into the light, trying to avoid ever looking at the darkness. But as a result, they didn't notice the darkness creeping up until it was right behind them.
It's a cycle of competing extremes, which again is why this is a continual thing, at least in the Star Wars universe. But this isn't the end of it. As we see, these poems reoccur, so these themes get readdressed in different ways throughout the book.
And it's same with parenting too. Like sometimes people think like, just being an authoritative parent is the only way to go. Like, spank your children if they like talk back to you, or whatever. Or the other end of it being like, let your kids do whatever you want. And like neither of those is like the appropriate case.
It's always the balance in between. It's always the balance between. Oftentimes it's slightly one-sided. There's never a perfect balance in the center because.
There's also a thing called, what's the name of it? It's called neutrality bias, I think, or something. Is that the phenomenon of that? Like there also isn't a neutrality bias because some things are better than the other.
Yeah, precisely. It's like
objectively.
It's like the scale of whether you should be good or evil all the time. It's always not perfectly good, not perfectly evil. It's always halfway between good and neutral. That's just how the world works. Because otherwise you can't enjoy life. Because true selflessness just kills you.
And then you factor in personal perspective on what might count to be good or bad for an individual person, and then it all becomes more complicated.
Yeah. It's like the religious fanatic is utterly convinced of his own righteousness.
Very, very powerful for tying into the Star Wars specifically, because that is all about the Jedi
it's
and Sith.
much, oh my god.
More
lots of crime for Antoine. Lots of crime. Yeah.
Just as we're talking about light and dark,
there is.
Someone's committing darkness in his city right now. No.
What I like too about, maybe it might be that the benefit of the prose is that, in general, is that you yourself can kind of insert the voice that you want for the characters. And create the imagination you want. So that, in a way, I mean, for me, I do feel like books in general are better for engaging your imagination than a film, and that's one of the reasons I think, for instance, like the line where he says he could still be surprised by the new depth in his voice, referring to Anakin, and for anyone specifically, like that means something different for me than what it can mean to Connor or to Matt. Like that it's a very specific experience for the reader himself or herself as going through it.
Even single words, like what does maturity mean for you? That can be very different things, especially related to people like Anakin.
He's ridiculously good at this. He's ridiculously like this. He understands hearts and minds, where Lucino's the best world builder, like of the Star Wars authors. Yeah,
completely agree. If these two paired together are the best, as far as I'm concerned, world building for Lucino and character work for Stover.
Which is
by the
really
way, while we're discussing voices, just throw this out there. The audio drama for this novelization is absolutely spectacular, and you should check it out.
I agree with that. And
is it read by the same guy who did the Thrawn trilogy?
Those have been done by a few different people because they're so classic and old.
Well, I meant the 25th anniversary. Sorry, the newer version with the sound effects.
I don't think so. I think that was Mark Thompson. I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay, Mark Thompson. This was not Mark Thompson.
It's not Mark Thompson.
No,
it's Jonathan Davis. And Jonathan Davis is great with Clone Wars era stuff. I don't like him as the Bane voice, but that's different. Like, but he's great with all the Clone Wars era material. This especially, I agree, Evan. It's spectacular.
Yeah, and then go back to Stover and his. Yeah, thank you for that. It's actually good because the credit is deserved, in the same way that Stover has his credit. They need the credit too. But yeah, and talking about that he's so great with characters, one of the more important things that he is establishing in this first chapter is the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan, which you can see. Lucas was trying to kind of mend because in the last movie they were just bickering the whole time, but it's just that it's like a little bit not enough.
Too late.
Too little, too late. And here, again, he has a little bit more time to do it, and also he has different dialogue set up here as well in different sequences. So in that context, he does a lot better of doing that. Like there's a point where literally a thought that Obi-Wan has is reflected by Anakin, and you're like, "Whoa, is that like some Jedi clairvoyance?" But no, it's because the relationship.
They know each other so well.
It's not the Force's experience. It comes up a few times that little moment. I love as well that while this is all sealing and bigging up the bond they share, it's also laying the groundwork for the background tensions between the two. Not in a bad way. It's not like it's just a constant boiling point in the background of Anakin's mind. It's genuinely addressed in the next set of chapters, and I love the way it culminates. With Obi-Wan talking about how Obi-Wan unintentionally kind of mentoring Anakin and teaching him lessons he already knows, just purely out of the fact that it's habit. and how something as simple as that can be grating on Anakin, but at the same time he understands ultimately why Obi-Wan's doing it. It's not like it's a true irritant. It's just like, yep, okay, Master, you're forgetting again.
And going back to the poem about like not having or kind of denying the dark in lieu of the light, there's a line where they say that they both had pretended the war had not changed them, and the fact that they haven't addressed that, like they haven't had that conversation, or for instance, Obi-Wan hasn't come forward to Anakin about Padme and like all that situation, is a case of that. You're kind of just shying away from the darkness when you need to have that to have growth.
Yeah, the idea that like Obi-Wan pretends to not know what's going on there. Like the war has like it gives him like this funnel to focus on something else, and not deal with like their more personal issues. And like I said, like Anakin gives Obi-Wan something to be proud of. Meanwhile, the war is forging Anakin. Like he's honing himself by this. Like they're both being completely changed on a fundamental level by this, even if they don't want to admit it. Which who would want to admit that?
Yeah,
but it's true.
Yeah. So we kind of get a little segment dedicated to each character in this specific point. This is Obi-Wan Kenobi, yada yada yada. This is Anakin Skywalker.
Is this the point that Callan had his issues? Is this
no, not yet.
It's not here.
It's creeping up on us. It's creeping up on us. The individual, this is Anakin, this is Obi-Wan moments. I love that. It's a really nice dive. I'm not sure how I feel about the style of writing, because it's not quite an internal dive. It is commentary on them, rather than their own personal opinions. Even though it is kind of both. But in terms of what's actually being said and not the how of it, I love it. It's all really good dives. Especially if you don't know it. If you're not familiar with these characters, this is the perfect introduction to them.
Yeah, it's different, but I wouldn't say it's distracting either.
Right, and it's like having like a lore book in the middle of the novel. Right. But the reason I think it works, I don't think this would work in every book. You know what I mean? I don't think you can just like insert this into any franchise and like, oh yeah, it's just the formula is instantly going to work, because of it being grandiose and being
this is Commander Shepard. No,
right? Yeah, or being like space opera. You kind of can get away with it. It is a space opera, so you can do this kind of thing.
And this is the climax of the story as well. So
I was going to say,
it's theatrical.
I think as a finale to like this first half of the trilogy, I think it works as well, because like what he's talking about has been built up to in so many other works. So it's like it's it makes sense on that level to have that gravitas. Yeah.
Like a little mini recap of everything that's come before and what this is all kind of leading to.
And I did read this before the majority of my experience with the EU, so it's like it was helpful to have that set that sort of benchmark for me. Oh, these are the characters. Like I understand them in my mind now, where I didn't before entirely. So yeah.
Right. Exactly.
What lessons stuck out to you when they talk about what they've learned and how they've grown over time? Each character individually.
I mean, previous to this, like leading up to this?
No, like in this sequence, like they did during these little sessions about Obi-Wan and Anakin.
Go ahead.
You mean like when they sort of like rename, like list off the sort of accomplishments?
Oh,
or,
you mean like Jabin,
sort of that? Not just accomplishments, but just how the war has changed them and what they've gone through. Obi-Wan learning to relax, Anakin learning to trust in his own strength, that sort of thing.
That's the one for Obi-Wan, is that like from Anakin, it's sort of like the completion of like his training. Like when they call it like a truism of the Jedi Order, that you don't really become who you are until you become a master, because you learn your final lessons from your students. That idea, and especially him having such an unorthodox one as Anakin, and the fact that he adapts to it and doesn't just sort of continue to go on or survive. He doesn't just thrive or survive, he thrives as a Jedi, Obi-Wan does. I think that mentoring Anakin is quite a test, and he passed it, like for the most part.
And for the most part, because like I've said this so many times before, but it was more benefit, that relationship was more benefit to Obi-Wan than it was to Anakin, in the sense that Obi-Wan was going on the trajectory before Anakin came into his life of the Anakin. Like, he was like, the bold, hot-headed Padawan that got tapered
in the Phantom Menace. Yeah,
right, exactly. And he got tapered by being, accompanied by this kid who's like, oh, I probably shouldn't be doing that because I'll be a bad example for him. But then realizing why it is he should be the great Jedi that he is.
And never quite moving on from that point, because he gets so much entrenched in the habit of kind of checking Anakin's
right, because there's a point we need to like.
Mm-hmm. Which is something like
Obi-Wan
parents with
Kenobi has
Antoine towards
learned
the
to
end.
relax.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's obviously that great line that we'll get to with one of the later chapters, but just that combination of that issue between the two and how it relates to the kind of elevator scene. It's
also a nice nod to Qui-Gon, like Qui-Gon being able to tell that this kid is what you need, Obi-Wan. Like you've grown beyond me, but there's still more you have to learn, but not from me. But you can learn it from him. Like I like that, like little nod to him.
And then on to the
Master
Padawan
commenting on how much Qui-Gon and how much Anakin reminds him of Qui-Gon.
Well, the funny thing is the fact that when he switched over from being Qui-Gon's Padawan to Anakin's master, Obi-Wan Kenobi's position in life was pretty much completely flip-flopped in a very intriguing way. Because as Qui-Gon's Padawan, he was the Padawan of a maverick Jedi who liked to take things a little too far, didn't always do what he was told, and he was constantly trying to rein in his master, who himself was constantly trying to egg Obi-Wan on to be a little bit less by the book, a bit more intuitive. Whereas now as Anakin Skywalker's master, he's trying to rein in a crazy-ass Padawan who wants to do the crazy shit and is trying to egg him on to do the crazy shit.
Which is interesting that Obi-Wan has all those ingredients, because it then makes a degree of sense that Dooku can see parts of himself in Obi-Wan even from afar, having been his master's master, but being very different from who Qui-Gon was. You know, like young Obi-Wan would have had some things more in common with Dooku as a Jedi.
Yes, definitely.
I mean, that whole Master-apprentice line kind of has a lot of, stalwart crazy.
You're not wrong. I mean, looking at Clone Wars, look at Ahsoka. She is the next one in line for the Obi-Wan sensibility personality. Yeah.
Which does that mean Dooku was hot-headed and Yoda had? No, I'm just.
That's a good point. There
Probably
was a slight
not.
break there. That is a slight break.
Yeah.
Clenched-jawed, certainty in his own way.
Yeah,
like
because Dooku's lies with his arrogance and his sense of personal
Especially
power.
when you see what he was like as a kid in that one book.
He's the one that doesn't quite fit the chain, but that's Dooku in a nutshell, though, isn't it? So
he did leave.
Yeah.
Dooku is a perfect example of what I term the Jedi who are great Jedi on paper, but that's only because they're just smiling and nodding and going along with the philosophy and what's said by keeping their thoughts to themselves.
Dooku is different.
Yeah, before we dive into his chapter, though, because we're getting to the kind of close of the Obi-Wan Anakin, this is where I want to touch on the whole thing where I was saying it was a bit of like a circle joke for Obi-Wan Anakin, because it's a cumulative effect for this. Any one kind of set of paragraphs where he dives into this, I have no problem with. But because we get like a fair few of them, starting with then this then is Obi-Wan and Anakin, it kind of beats you over the head with how great they are, even in relation to other people in the galaxy. They're saying it's the whole together they are unstoppable, unbeatable. They're the ultimate go-to guides of the Jedi Order. That's fine by itself. But then you have that paired with the next few chapters commenting on these are the ones that everyone the galaxy's perspective of them, the way it's been bigged up in the HoloNet. There's too much focus on those two at the exclusion of everyone else for me.
Yeah, which is it is done on purpose. I mean, it is
yet, but okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, that is kind of the point. They're meant to be bigged up as these, golden heroes who could do no wrong, which makes the tragedy all the more, tragic.
For sure, and I think from the perspective of the HoloNet and also the one dive in their own mentalities or how they're being perceived by someone like, for example, Palpatine or Dooku, I get it. But there's like 3 or 4 specific sequences in the book where they just dive into that alone, and I find it's a little bit over the top for me. But again, it's not a major criticism. It's just a flavor thing for me.
I see. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I do think that it should have been that way in the films to like make Anakin that person, like very clearly, so you understand what kind of effect this supposed chosen one is supposed to have on the galaxy.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it definitely should have been more present in the films. I just think it could have been done with a little bit less presence here, personally. But it's not a major gripe, honestly. It's just a case of it was just a joke with a circle joke thing.
I see what you're saying. I just think I'm being a little bit more charitable because the films didn't touch on that enough. I think maybe he felt the need to sort of like this is the chance to, bring that
compensate
to the forefront. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Well, going backwards, because that one's actually a little bit ahead. Let's look at the very end of the chapter. We kind of missed the discussion of Anakin and his motivations going into this battle, and also this is Anakin Skywalker moment. Because his motivation, the biggest thing to him is that he is trying to get to Palpatine, who is to him his actual father figure. It's Obi-Wan's more of a bigger brother, but Palpatine, that's his actual mentor who actually listens to him in a way that the Jedi don't. Obviously, he's doing it, to egg him on and put him into the darkness. But it's from his perspective, it's a genuine friend that he has. Well, not a genuine friend, but a genuine mentor that he can talk to. So I thought all of that was established really well. And then the whole sequence by the way, the sequence with the dying star and the dragon, was that in Jedi Quest, or is it that he constructed this himself?
I don't know actually, but I really like the sequence. The whole idea of the dead star dragon.
I think what you're.
I love that.
What you're referring to, there is a point where he sort of compares his rage to kind of like a dragon. I think the quest uses the word serpent, like desert serpent, Antoine. But as far as it's never like this book definitely makes it.
It feels like a different analogy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
It does.
I was
trying
to
find
for such a long time. I was like, was this something that happened? Yeah.
It's like I don't know if it's coincidental. It may have been an intentional nod to that, but it's not like a complete through line from what that's just not the impression I ever had. I never really thought about that, but that's an interesting thing.
Well, I was just doing just for me because I just didn't know if I just missed something from Jedi Quest.
Yeah.
So I was like, was this part of it or something?
I haven't read those books in so long.
Yeah, neither have I.
Yeah.
So.
I think
like a desert serpent is the phrase he uses, but I honestly can't remember fully. So,
but I love it though.
We'll get to dive in again
pretty
soon to them in our plans.
Right.
Yeah. I love the whole stars, comparison he makes. The fact that he has trouble imagining something as huge and imposing as a star actually dying out. I love that parallel.
And it's the same way that he puts the Jedi on the pedestal. Like when he first sees Qui-Gon, he's like, he thinks that they can't die. You know what I mean? Like that's how far he thinks of Jedi. So for him to have that lesson with the star and to know that even they die, for him, he internalizes that, which he's always doing. It's the very opposite of Obi-Wan, who's always keeping things on the outs. It's always about Anakin, and for him to see that lesson, he's like, oh, what about me? Can I fail? And then when things like his mother happened or something like that, and then him doubting himself and thinking, oh, I could not make it in time to save Palpatine, I think really works well.
Yeah,
for
I love that.
impression.
The idea that he's not going to be late again because
that single line. He was late once before.
That.
Yeah. He's very good with single powerful moments, in single line format in this. Very early on in the book as well. Also, I want to note that while I'm not a big fan of the kind of over the top, not grandiose, wrong word, but really on the nose kind of explorations, but with Anakin, it really fits. Like the stuff when he's talking about the only beauty he will ever see is Padme, and the
right, that's him.
Yeah, that entire paragraph is just ridiculously over the top and on the nose and cheesy. But with Anakin and the fact that he has such issues with his perspective and with passion, it really fits.
You kind of buy it, yeah.
Anakin's a fairly simple-minded character.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's stupid, but he's very straightforward with what he wants. So it makes sense for him.
Yeah.
Raw.
The problem is the film made him too straightforward.
Yes,
well, no, that's the thing. Reading that and then going back to Attack of the Clones and seeing the type of things that he is saying to Padme, like they're over the top romantic, like things that real humans don't really say. That he's saying to Padme to like kind of woo her or whatever, or just how he's explaining his feelings. And I think Connor brought it up too at one point is that he doesn't know how to be in a relationship. You know what I mean? And so the kinds of things that he is saying is like, just don't really jive or work, and they are kind of grandiose, and it's like you need to just like hone it back a little bit. Like everything in life isn't going to be
Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah,
right.
And I'll never buy why they gave her like I'm a senator. It's like, so what? I mean, like that's like she should be competent at least, but it comes off like neither of them are. That's what makes it so hard to watch.
Yeah, precisely. I'm the same way. I can almost buy the idea of Anakin being kind of goofy in that situation, but with her, she should have been part of his maturity. She should have been the one that kind of guided him along that journey.
You're like, hey, you don't have to talk to me like this. We could just have a normal conversation. That would have been.
Yeah, maybe not that on the nose, but definitely that sort of thing.
Obviously not that straight.
And not.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Though I know what you mean. Yeah.
And not to harp on that one, but like forget the sand thing. I hate the line. I wish I could just wish away my feelings. It's oh God, rewrite that please. Like no actor. It's not fair. It's not fair to Hayden Christensen or any other actor to make them try to say that line. That's a terrible line. But anyway.
In any way you do it, even if you give it to Ewan McGregor, I don't know if he can. Maybe he can do it.
Just quickly backpedaling to the discussion of Anakin's fears. It's another thing that just brings to mind how Darth Vader becoming Darth Vader was basically the ultimate karmic payback for all of the shit Anakin did. What Anakin very specifically wants is he wants something eternal that he can hitch his horse to, and that's what he's constantly chasing after. But the problem is that by clutching at everything so tightly, trying to hold on to it, trying to make it eternal, he crushes everything until finally all that's left is himself. And in a way, the figure of Darth Vader is like an attempt to create something eternal, because what you have is this blasted husk of humanity on life support they're basically being suspended on the cusp of death, trying to keep him alive forever, but ultimately it's just not doable, and Anakin dies in 20 years.
Again, that going back to the extremes of the dark and how Anakin is so susceptible to that. It's why Palpatine very specifically, sees him as perfect, because he's so malleable in that purity.
And that's the interesting thing is it was never clear to me early on, like what Palpatine's true motives were. It's like, is this your perfect apprentice or is it your perfect weapon? I'm like, back then it was ambiguous to me. Like these days I would say, okay, he's just a tool like anyone else because of the way the Emperor goes. But at the time I bought it, that like maybe he really does view Anakin as the right successor for him, and I like that.
And that's like the ending, or not the ending, part of the ending, that's what makes him a real hero, not the way the HoloNet labels him, not without fear, but stronger than fear, which kind of, for me, related back to the Bruce Lee quote of not praying for an easy life, but praying for the strength to endure a difficult one. And that's something that he kind of prides himself on, like he has kind of come up from, literally being a slave, and he prides himself on just like, being above fear, or at least trying to, even though he doesn't always do his best at doing it. That's what he strives for. Yeah, and what makes him do so well against Dooku early on. I mean, not early on. Later on is when he actually does conquer his fear. That's probably, for me, that's actually Anakin at his best, possibly. But we'll get to that a little bit later.
Yeah, and it can't be like hero without fear. So I can't remember what it is, but there's some like mainstream thing that he goes like. You can only be brave when you are afraid. Like, I mean, otherwise, what would that mean? So, but I mean, that's what it boils down to. I can't remember what that's a quote from, but that's like a thing, and it's true.
Oh God, no! You've got me thinking about that now.
It's something, right?
Yeah, it's something like, huge that discusses that courage is not. Oh,
right. Sounds. Yeah.
It's like some mainstream thing. I'm sorry.
I can visualize the line. I can visualize the line. I can't visualize the sequence. Anyway, that'll.
One thing I thought was inconsistent, though, is the sequence with Oddball, which I know is something that carried over directly from the movie, and it's kind of like supposed to be the save the cat moment, like, oh, we should like Anakin because he doesn't want clones to die. But it is kind of playing in cross purposes to what we just previously got, which is like Palpatine. I have to get to Palpatine, and then having him go like, oh no. Let me go help these clones. Like, it's kind of like, no, that's, I mean, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to make, light him up as like a good guy so we can know, he's going to have a fall later. But that might happen. It might be better to have that in a different sequence or something like that, not in this.
Have it be less out of
not lay on the determination so strongly, then immediately cut to that.
Yeah. And the other reason why it doesn't really make much sense is because Anakin's whole approach to military warfare up to this point has always been leading the charge, frontal assault, high casualties, high risk, high reward. It's like he gets clones killed all the time. Why would he care today?
I mean, even in the old EU before this came out, it was established that he did have some relationship with some of his troops. But yeah, I see where you're going. He was more gung ho about it than most.
Well, he was. His operating style didn't like. It wasn't like he loved those results though. Like he always wanted to minimize casualties for sure. But I agree that it's misplaced. He does this a couple times in this book where like Anakin and Obi-Wan will like have a moment, and then like in the next chapter it's like reset before that conversation almost. I noticed that. Like I think we'll talk about that in a specific point before they face Dooku.
Yeah, agreed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but then it's afterwards. It's kind of just an extension on the Starfighter sequence we got from the film.
Which is action, just showing that Anakin's really good. Obi-Wan doesn't like flying.
Yeah.
And they get through it together. And we already talked about the ending part.
And don't mess with buzz droids.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an extended sequence of this book, actually. That
goes
on for a while.
I think we can go to Dooku for that. Yeah, that's something that you usually can run over. It's just kind of like action, which if you read it your first time, it's like, okay, yeah, I want to get into it, but afterwards it's kind of like,
action, done.
Yeah. Unless you're like really into Starfighter combat,
Which I mean, like I can reread that freaking fight with Dooku over and over. Like that's an action sequence that I'm okay, which is literally just talking about people poking each other with light sticks, and I'm okay with like reading
I like
that
it,
over.
but it's character based.
But true,
Yeah.
very true, very true.
I think
this one isn't.
Yeah, I think the big thing is the fact that the lightsaber duel is a much more personal form of combat where the way they fight is an expression of who they are, whereas Starfighter combat, even with someone like Anakin at the helm, is pretty impersonal. It's just your overpowered anime character crushing disposable mooks to show off how cool he is.
In this specific context, yeah. But with Anakin, it's all about how he connects with the fighter itself, how it's part of who he is on a kind of physical level. You know, he is the world's or the galaxy's greatest starfighter pilot, and he loves it. There's no connection with tying him to anyone else in this. There's no stakes involved on an emotional level, which is obviously lightsaber combat is more personal in general, just the physical presence of another being in front of you, face to face. But also how it relates to the characters. It's always even a book where you're focusing on starfighter combat, unless you tie it to another character, being connected to the pilot somehow. It's always going to be that separation. There's always going to be that separation there.
Has anyone read?
It's actually for those
Wedge
reasons
books?
that I really like the Starfighter battle between him and Ventress in the micro series, because they do really play up that personable element and the fact that she is not as skilled as him, but it's one of the few times he's actually been challenged on that front, and I think that really comes off well.
Especially when you tie it to the nature of the starfighters in that specific instance as well, how they reflect both their styles. But I to answer your question, Antoine, I've read a few of them way back in the day.
Right, because I haven't. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if it's like the Wedge Antilles.
Oh yeah, like a long time ago. Yeah, they're very beloved.
It's been too long.
Yeah. They are very beloved, though. I will revisit them one of these days.
We'll cover them one of these
Going
days.
back to character stuff, like I
If you
like
want,
that he represents, like he doesn't just say Anakin wants to kill Dooku and is angry. Like he just says what exactly he's doing. That's him looking down at his fist and like closing it, opening it, closing it, and thinking about like. And really, if you haven't really had the context of Attack of the Clones, you're like, what is he doing? What is that about? But it's great to let the reader figure it out instead of just like spelling it out and being like, he hates Dooku, he wants to kill him. He's like just having him have that moment.
It also serves really well as like an end to like the, I guess the classic EU portrayal of the Clone Wars, which was, for my money, a darker, grittier take than like many people's perspective on it or perception of it these days, because like it was like a gritty war story, with like lots of terrible consequences. And although Dooku, right, well, and not only that though, but that's
but that's just one that always stuck out to me.
It's the fact that the micro series actually gave us some. It's the fact that the Clone Wars micro-series actually gave us a moment where Obi-Wan Kenobi was just sitting in a goddamn trench, just trying to take a nap in abject misery because it's wet, it's damp, it's drizzly, there's water dripping on his head no matter where he sits or how, and his clone commander has just told him that they're going to be here for another 6 months before they can even do anything. So he's just going to be sitting here in the mud, getting a cold, waiting for the shields to go down.
And like the loss of innocence, loss of friends, like corruption, money spent, just years of just suffering, and the only face that someone like Anakin or really any of the Jedi have, because they don't know much about Sidious at this point, is Dooku. Like that's the face you associate with this. So yeah, like he's pissed, and it's justifiable. Anakin goes overboard because Anakin, but you can understand it. It's rooted in a very human, relatable place.
It's where Anakin's flaws should come from, because in the film it just makes him look like that's all he is, whereas here you understand the kind of the root of his drive and where his fears come from, where his passions come from, how they manifest and why, and when they manifest, why they are doing so in those moments. It's very powerful in the sequence.
Like on screen, like Dooku means like almost nothing to me. Like I don't. If you just watch the films, like what are you talking about, or like where did you come from? This is like the show don't tell like way of storytelling for me.
Definitely.
That's the case for like Dooku and Mace. Like I don't get, if I just watched the movies, I wouldn't care about either one of those characters.
Yeah, no, like Mace is like okay, whatever. Mace is. And
then
you read
Shatterpoint and Dark Rendezvous and be like, oh my god. Yeah.
I love that book. We will cover that at some point.
But both of them.
So we get into
diving into the Dooku chapter. Moving off from Anakin and Obi-Wan and focusing a bit on him for the start.
Well, I want to say before we do that, because the chapter begins with them. This is really quick for me. If you guys have other stuff, that's fine. I like the way that they foreshadow Dooku's death, because it's very simple prose, but it's like an elegant idea and it's executed efficiently. I like the the portrayal of Anakin's Force vision. I really like the way that was phrased. He goes, he was looking at an image inside his head, not an image, a reality, a memory of something that hadn't happened yet. I love that. Like that sort of
a memory that hasn't happened yet. That's great.
Yeah, that's so great. Like it's very simple and easily understood, and at the same time something that you may feel like you understand from like dreams or whatever, but at the same time he didn't put it that way. And it's almost alien, but just enough. It's like it's on the edge of your perception as a normal being. You can put yourself into that headspace, even though it's foreign to you.
Yeah, the perfect blend of mystical but relatable. You know, it's very difficult to do that kind of thing, and especially in such a short amount of word space.
And we even have Dooku himself experience something similar later towards the end of the fight.
Yeah,
that's true.
Just quickly mentioning, if you want to read a storyline that kind of explores that sort of idea much more thoroughly, I would really recommend you read Frank Herbert's Dune. There's my tangent, my unrelated tangent. Moving on.
Thank you for keeping it concise, and I will keep it.
This has been your
sci-fi
this
classic.
has been your latest Jedi announcement. Yeah, no, I need to get around to that at some point as well. I keep putting it off. It's on the back burner.
It's been around since like the 60s. I need to get on it at some point. But anyway.
It's one of the books on my bedside. I reread it all the time.
So after that, we cut to Dooku and Palpatine in the Chancellor's quarters.
This is Dooku. Well, not quite there yet.
I love the description of him being cold. Like he's not. It's not so much that like at one point he talks about like how the sadly necessary war. Like it's not really like a. He's not Grievous. He's not a monster. He's not just out there to kill and murder. But then also him saying like he doesn't understand love, hate, and joy, which is another thing. We'll do Dark Rendezvous at some point, but that's a huge thing between him and Yoda. And him just being someone who's like flat and just placid and just like emotionless and
stone
just an ice cold soul.
Sociopath.
Yeah, it's like the thing is, it's like I guess you don't really become one. You kind of always are one, and like the idea is he was one even as a Jedi, and at the same time he was a good Jedi. For the majority of his career. So it's very interesting. You could tell a lot of stories, or maybe just one really good one there for sure. I think there's a lot of potential there. I don't remember exactly where it is, but he also has like a bit of a briefing with Grievous, which I love because Grievous he displays an overwhelming and utter competence, which isn't there like in the film. I love that because if you're just watching the film, like it does come off like plot holes. Like why are they just sitting there waiting for the Jedi to come rescue Palpatine? Like why didn't they leave? I could have had the Chancellor out system or out of Republic space like hours ago. I love that Grievous is thoughtful and practical, and he's the leader, but his hands are tied by his superiors who leave him out of the loop, and that makes everything make sense. And you could explain this with very short amount of screen time. This should be in the movie.
Yeah, very easy.
Agreed.
Just literally
He's the definition of an in-betweener. Yeah.
And it really bigs up the fact that he is a threat. It doesn't diminish him in any way. You know, this is something that he has no control over, and you get that. I would like to note though, because there are moments in this. I completely agree with that specific scene, and also his general portrayal in general. But there are single moments throughout this that I think that the voice of Grievous is slightly lost for me. There are certain things he says, I can't remember any off the top of my head, where it's like a little bit off-key in terms of how I envision him personally, and particularly following up from Labyrinth. And
are you envisioning him via
purely
the series or
all of it, the entire kind of expanded universe portrayal? I feel like he's a little bit off, even following on straight from Labyrinth to me. I can't remember the specific instances.
What do you mean by like off key?
Just like, single lines he'll sometimes say, which I think like that's not quite Grievous for me. But it's not a major thing. It's just I noticed that a few times going through here that I hadn't remembered that from previous readings.
I can understand with this character because like nobody knew what the hell they were doing with him behind the production side of things. He changes so much, even up into including when they put out the movie. So I think it's understandable that different people will have different. Yeah, different people will have different takeaways. So like whatever your interpretation is, I think maybe just as valid as mine or anyone else's because he was such a transient character in that way.
Completely agree. It's very minor for me. It's not like it's not a major criticism at all. It's just something I noted that I hadn't really picked up on before in previous readings.
Personally, I love like several lines that he has, but it would make sense to me if they didn't jive for you. Like, I really like the one where he's all like, "Congratulations on your promotion, take your post." You know, like
there's loads I love. Loads I love. I want to stress it's only like the occasional blip. It's by no means the entire portrayal of the character. It's just I noticed it this time because again I hadn't before. Because this is one of my favorite iterations. Full stop. So.
And we can move on from this soon because this is like the Dooku chapter. But because Evan mentioned earlier the audio drama, I do really like the way Jonathan Davis portrays Grievous's voice because it's very chilling. And it's not an attempt to do Matthew Wood's like Count Dooku, blah, blah. Like it's not that.
No, it's just very mechanical.
Yeah, it's just chilling. Yeah. Like robot voice, and he's very flat.
And they do put an effect over it though, to give it a more robot tinge, but it's not like distracting or anything. It's not cheesy.
He has that sort of untouchable, like beyond you, sort of unconcerned with you evil, but at the same time there's a mild sadist behind there that he gives like the Voldemort vibe, like that he gives to his Death Eaters. So it's like I better listen to you otherwise I'm dead.
Yes,
I really like that.
Slightly unbalanced.
That's actually my favorite voice for him. I like even more so than the micro series.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that there is a conspiracy theorist out there, like someone on Coruscant or someone in the galaxy who's got like dark web on the HoloNet, asked the same questions and was like, yeah, the Separatists got him out pretty quickly. Why did they not leave? Was there a conspiracy that like, and someone like discovered that Palpatine is like the Dark Lord, but then like no one ever listened to him because like, Tom, shut up. Like that's not what happened. I like to think that exists.
Unsolved mysteries with
he's describing the Deveronian version where you just get like some crackpot version of the story. I love that. Yeah. That's like a comic
that would actually make for an interesting short story. Have like that be this one dude who figures it out, and then like at the end he like turns around and like I don't know some red guard like starts strangling him or something. I don't know.
It's one of those things where Palpatine wouldn't even suppress it because if someone's spousing a conspiracy theory and it happens to be perfectly right, no one's going to believe it.
They let that droid go.
Besides, that's what I mentioned. The droid from Labyrinth is wandering around spouting stuff like, "Oh my god, it's what you don't understand. Everything's topsy-turvy." It's great.
And no one realizes it. Well, it's a deliberate red herring tactic, and that's pretty much Palpatine's modus operandi for deception right across the board. It's all about hiding in plain sight. It's like he's almost like Hannibal Lecter in that very rarely does he ever tell a straight lie. Most of what he says is half-truths or layered with double meaning, but isn't an out-and-out falsehood.
With the various meanings you can draw from what he's saying, all lying in his court and his favour as well. It's all about him. He always has multiple ways to win, even when it looks like he's losing. Just some of them are better than any given other one.
I like how other works also tie in with like the teachings of the Sith that came before him too, because elements of that go back to Darth Bane or even before, and also the Sith Lord that we never actually meet, but his writings are shared. Darth Guile, like he has like sort of a monologue that Plagueis shares, or like that Palpatine shares to Plagueis. So yeah, like it's interesting how they sort of make it not all Palpatine, but like he's learned the Sith ways to a T.
And we also get a bit of a background segment where we learn of Duke. It explores Dooku's history and his rise through the ranks of the Jedi and his eventual abandonment of the Order. Lorian Nod is mentioned. I like that. A little reference to that short story.
Again, as someone who came into this reading this particular book without like all this other knowledge that I discovered later, this was like really fascinating tidbits for me. Like where I was like, oh, what is all this? This really made me want to go dive in and learn more.
Yeah,
for sure.
While not leaving you confused as well. It's very good at giving you that synopsis in a brief like few sentences, so you're not going, wait, what? Oh, I don't need to read the rest of this, so I just want to read it in the book. It's very good for new readers.
J.K. Rowling does a really good job of doing that too. Like she'll just name drop like famous wizards and events just out of nowhere, but you never like, oh no, I feel like I'm out of the loop. It's just like, oh no, that's just something to discover, that kind of thing.
Very cool. Merlin as well. All the constant references to Merlin, even outside just the swearing. I'm like, I want to know about Merlin. Someone give me a story about Merlin. Give me a history magic lesson about Merlin.
Yeah.
But yeah.
What I like about the introduction of Dooku too is that one of the first things he says is that the voice that answered him so familiar that sometimes his very thoughts spoken it instead of his own. Like it to me that shows the indoctrination of, or just being in the presence of Sidious in general. Like how
pervasive
he is.
How pervasive
psychologically
his mental manipulation is.
Yeah, dominant.
The disdain he has for the Jedi indoctrination as well, when he himself is more indoctrinated than almost any Jedi. It's I love that because it's perfectly suits his brand of arrogance and supremacy.
I love the portrayal. Sorry, I just wanted to say I love the portrayal of his elitism in this. They execute that really well.
Yeah, and since we're on the topic of Dooku's Jedi showing, I actually recently had a bit of a revelation about Palpatine and all of his apprentices. Technically speaking, Palpatine didn't train a single Sith apprentice. He just trained 3 Dark Jedi to varying levels. It's like Maul, was trained in Sith philosophy, but in terms of his skill set, his capabilities, he was basically just a dark Jedi. It's like his ambitions would never go anywhere because Palpatine never gave him anything truly of the Sith. He was just rattling off the Sith code while pulling out his lightsaber, and that's all he did. Dooku is basically a radicalized Jedi fascist who honestly thinks he's doing the right thing, even though he's completely deluded. And Vader is much the same way. It's like they're not Sith Lords where it's all about me, 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 me. I want to rise to the top. I want to be the emblem of dark power. What they want to be is symbols of order, which is, in a lot of ways, what the Jedi want. Like, they never say it in those terms because for them, it's more of a profound thing, but in essence.
It perfectly fits Palpatine because he doesn't want people to...
Guys, wait, Antoine, are you trying to...
Wait, I was going to say two things to jump off of that because it works so well, is that with the Dooku delusion that you brought up, I think that kind of, because of that delusion, because we all had the issue of him doing this whole humanist, specious thing that he has going on, but going with that line of thinking, it kind of, in a way, works for that, and also it's consistent. Like, at least he's consistent with that through line, in his conversations with Grievous and just in all the thinkings. And then also with Vader, you're very right in saying that, yeah, he's basically just a dark Jedi, and he doesn't change, notably until after he discovers that Luke is his son, and that he kind of gains a motivation based on that. And that's a big thing from that is Shadows of the Empire. All of his internal monologue is about him finding like a new purpose. Because he's like, oh,
Vader's
wait, I have a legacy
here.
That.
Yeah.
Right.
It's why he can reach out that ultimate, not redemption, because I hate calling it that. But yeah, the awakening has happened then as a result. But the reason I love that, Connor, and what you mentioned there is about that Palpatine, that's intentional. He doesn't want a Sith apprentice because a Sith apprentice is about me, me, me. He wants to be an apprentice about Palpatine. Or Sidious specifically. That's by design. So yeah, and it works well with Dooku. It helps explain some of Dooku's warped nature as well, because the indoctrination is so complete that while it's obviously rooted in the main core of his issue is rooted in his own personal flaws, it makes sense that some of the things that stand out a bit odd to us might be taken to further extremes because it's fostered by Palpatine himself. It's intentional on his part.
In my opinion,
but again, still the xenophobia just does not gel with me. I mean, I get what you're saying, Antoine. It fitting in this moment, like this specific moment. Yeah. But like the issue is when you compare it to everything else.
Right.
Yeah, it just doesn't hold.
I read this book before Doc Rendezvous, but even before that, it was like, this guy was a Jedi. How could he have ever had this perspective? Like, he was Yoda's student. Yeah. Like, Yoda's like a thing. Well, we don't know, right?
Yeah, I know.
So the one thing they will never explain. Yeah. Thank God.
So it's like, I never understood this specious thing, but at the same time, I do buy the sort of militant, like the embrace of like this fist of like the Empire, like we'll have an army of Sith, and that like in the way that I like this also, that this book establishes that the Jedi never forced Force-sensitive children to come into their order. It's like they just join after a certain age. They didn't go around to people's, which has like been, that's been portrayed differently in different sources. Some will say, the Jedi insisted that they have claim on all the Force-sensitive children. I hate that idea. Don't like it. I like that in this way.
It's not Magneto like bringing you in.
Precisely.
Right. Yeah, I like this much better. But the idea, I can buy Dooku as the kind of person who would subvert that and be like, yeah, no, you don't have a choice anymore. Like they're ours. They're our assets, because he's that kind of extremist after his fall. I don't think Jedi Dooku would have been that way. He falls into that. But the specious thing that's above and beyond.
Yeah. And for me,
it's a really interesting think piece when you consider just how close he was to actually having the big picture, him, knowing about the Empire and the eventual rise. It was just his, really, in retrospect, the only things he was really wrong about. That's pretty much it, but the rest of it was spot on for the most part. And no Sith army, of course.
Yeah, how close it comes without
even though they did get
really
like sort of acolytes and things, but yeah.
Yeah.
But the other thing I don't like about Dooku is the prosthetic problem. He's against cybernetics, and to the point where
that's
it's
also
disgusting.
Weird too.
What?
I actually do like that.
But it's consistent though. I feel like it's consistent
within this book for sure. It's consistency of his allegiance, that's for sure. But
it's not something that I myself would believe, but I can buy him believing that. Like that whole thing about
if I had to choose between that and the xenophobia, I'd go with that.
Oh, absolutely, no question. But to me, it was another odd one. Like to me, he seems a bit more practical than that. That he wouldn't be overridden by his personal disgust for something when it's blatantly useful for people. It's just human and droid, they shouldn't be mixed. It's like, what, really? Okay.
Dooku, but Dooku's not right about everything. He actively goes looking to find fault with people that he like disapproves of on whatever level. And it's like, it's not that Anakin didn't do anything wrong. It's just like something like Dooku's zoning in on. You know, like this is like something I can like pick apart about you.
I like
you
that.
Know what I mean?
I like that. Having
He's
it be
petty
like,
that pettiness.
Him seeing it as like a weakness, and Anakin, he's weak. He lost his hand, and then saying, well, if he lost his hand, he should have learned to be a gentleman and fight with one. I understand that, and I like that side of things. It's just the personal disdain for cybernetic prosthetics in general that I thought was that's a bit too far for him, in my opinion. He's a little bit more of a pragmatist than that. It should be about the weakness and the result of how they needed the prosthetic. For me, it should have been the focus.
And
that's
then
fine.
after
Like,
that, we get
different opinions. So it's fine.
yeah. And then after that, it also kind of moves into him suggesting to Sidious that maybe they give Kenobi one more chance to join them, and it sort of highlights that little dynamic. Him referring to Kenobi as like almost his grandson in terms of the whole master-student lineage thing.
Yeah, he's
kind of an expansion on.
Yeah,
kind of an expansion of what went on in Attack of the Clones when he's interrogating Kenobi.
And this is also more far effective.
Go ahead.
It's more effective because it actually makes it seem like they have not met each other since Attack of the Clones. Unlike TCW where they've met each other like every week, and then it's like what. And this makes it more significant because you do get this buildup of like meeting these two Jedi again, and this is like the next showdown. They've been trying to get to each other the entire war, and now like this is about to go. Like I think that worked much better, here than elsewhere.
Oh, yeah,
and we also get like a little disconnect between Sidious and Dooku. Sidious is like, how fortunate I am to have an apprentice who thinks it's appropriate to lecture me.
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
I apologize.
And to his credit, though, I do like that Palpatine goes on to explain his thought process, though. Like, he doesn't leave it at that, even though he could. He could leave it at, I'm just not going to answer your question because fuck you. Like, I'm the master and, like, I don't need to. But he does. He does explain why Anakin's better suited for their purposes, which I enjoy. It helps me buy that Dooku believes this nonsense. Like, Dooku really, if he was thinking rationally, should see what this is. But because he so desperately wants this to be true, he believes in like the tantalizing carrot that like Palpatine's waving in front of him.
Exactly.
And that's what makes me buy it. Yeah.
It sells his delusion perfectly. And Palpatine wouldn't explain it to everyone, but because it's part of his delusion, he's perfectly willing to expend the effort. It's perfect for both characters.
It's not even that he's misunderstanding that Anakin's use to the Sith is purely as an enforcer, because truth be told, that's all Anakin can really be. What is Vader? It's Dooku himself not realizing that Palpatine doesn't want an equal. He doesn't want a partner. He doesn't want a Sith apprentice. He wants Vader.
Mm-hmm.
And Dooku could never have been that.
It also very subtly ties into Labyrinth, where Dooku has a brief moment of possible betrayal, brewing, but then quickly, stamps it out and goes along with warning his master about that he's been discovered. So I think that's a nice little tie-in too. It shows that Dooku does have some degree of aspiration
agency
for him. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, agency for himself, which is nice. Makes him a bit more three-dimensional.
Yeah,
again, unlike the movie.
Showing.
Yeah, he's not just the patsy. Yeah, he is very much. Even the way he talks to Sidious, he oversteps his bounds and redacts it, but he's not. He's confident in himself. He sees himself as worthy of Sidious's presence, despite the fact that he is constantly bigging up Sidious in his head. This black hole of raw energy, and this undefeatable person.
He's an unwitting patsy. He doesn't realize that that's all that he is, because if he knew that going into it, he never would have signed on for that.
Yeah.
It's funny how much he bigs Palpatine up in his head, because when you get right down to it, Palpatine himself is a pretty simplistic, petty character. It's like, yes, he's highly intelligent and very nuanced in his approach, but in his motivations, in his desires, and in the way he does things, like in the grand scheme, he's kind of an asshole, and there's not much more to him. Yet Dooku's been
That's basically all it is. Yeah, he's the most developed arsehole in all of fiction. That's all he is in one.
That's what makes Dooku an interesting and in some ways a tragic character for me. Is like there's when you realize that he is basically like a sociopath, like there's only so far this guy could have gone. But the idea that this isn't like pure evil, like he's being driven by like some kind of higher ideal. And a part of me feels bad for him because he doesn't realize how thoroughly he's been conned until the moment he does, which is like the end of his life.
Right.
Which is itself a kind of tragedy of the dark side as well. Tying with this chapter sets up the line of the Sith are about the treachery. Treachery is of the Sith. That's what gives that payoff there, and the fact that that's his ultimate and final realization is just that's the way the dark side works.
Yep.
I thought the notion of Kenobi having to die was really good. Like saying that his death is the key.
I was literally just going to bring that
perfect.
up. Yeah,
okay.
I wrote down that line, like, this was the day, the hour, the death of Obi-Wan Kenobi would be the death of the Republic. I wrote that down. Like, that's a really well done, puzzle piece.
Right, and I think that's actually very true, but I don't think it's in the way in which they want it to happen, which is by his actual death, because it's way more, what really drives Anakin that far is that he believes that he is betrayed by Kenobi, and sometimes that's even worse because, like Connor was saying before, if Anakin would have died in the Clone Wars, he would have been a martyr to the Republic and seen as a hero. They would have not seen any of the other stuff that he might have done. With Obi-Wan, if he just dies there, there's a chance that Anakin could hold up his memory to be like, oh, I don't think Obi-Wan would want me to do that. He will hold that up, maybe at a point. There's at least that option there. But if you just if he's the one, if you have Obi-Wan betraying him, or Anakin feels that way, then his anger for the Jedi and for Obi-Wan is that much greater, and that is what would solidify him to be a part of the Sith forever, not so much the literal killing of Obi-Wan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree with you also because that puts the onus on Anakin. I don't like the idea that Anakin was doomed like the moment the Jedi sent Obi-Wan to Utapau to face Grievous. I think like Anakin still has a stake in this. Anakin has a say. Anakin has choices to make. Anakin is a character with agency. He's not all down to Obi-Wan. Right. Sure. But I do like when you strip away all that extra context, like what you're saying is it can be true. Like the death of Kenobi can be the death of the Republic, even if it's not in the way that Dooku comprehends that. I think it's really beautifully done.
It's about poetic or thematic poetry. It's the balance of the idea of the agency of the characters with the destiny they've been forced down, while also wrapping around the cloak of the dark side, because Sidious is steering this all. It's very difficult to give these characters a sense of chance when Sidious is steering every single piece of the puzzle. You don't want to diminish the villain, but you also don't want to completely cast out any hope that there may be for Anakin and the rest of the main characters on the hero side. You have to think that there was a chance this could have gone well for the scales to feel like they've been tipped properly. And in the film,
I think there was, and that comes up later in the book for me. But
precisely. In this book, absolutely. I just meant in the films, you don't.
I was also gonna say that if there was no hope of Anakin avoiding falling to the dark side, then there would be no hope of him escaping it.
True. Yes, yeah, very true as well. And there are certain extents to how much you can take how much we personally feel that he deserved the idea of a quote unquote redemption. But yeah, he does at least get to that point where he had the chance prior to death.
I'll stick a pin in it and say that although Palpatine is a great chess player, some of this is just him being cocky enough to trust that what he's done is going to hold through, and it does. But it's not guaranteed to, and that's what makes it interesting for me.
And Dooku sees that as well.
Mace.
I love
that.
Mace. Yeah, that's brilliant.
But anyway, we'll get to that when we get to Mace.
I mean, that's like the line between a genius play or like a horrendous one. If J.R. Smith made that 3-pointer or made that shot, in the finals, people wouldn't be like memeing him right now. They would be like, "Oh, he's the greatest ever." But now he's like a meme because he didn't take the shot. Well, again, people know I'm an NBA person, so NBA reference.
Right.
I love the basketball reference for that though, because it's all about that hair's breadth. There is such a fine line.
It works. It really works for Palpatine because on some level he's just so good at playing the game. It's not like he knows exactly what's going to happen.
Now I've just got the vision of Sidious playing basketball.
Yeah, somebody.
Oh gosh.
I'm sure that already exists.
Can we not?
That already exists.
Oh god. Anyway, do we want to move on to the next chapter? Is that everything with Dooku covered?
I think we can move on to Way of the Sith.
Yes.
Doo-doo.
Aptly named. We open with the turbo doors lifts opening. Or the turbo lifts doors opening.
We don't get the hilarious, everyone's favorite scene, with the elevator and the jumping around and fighting the droids. That was sorely missed.
Such an important scene, yeah. How could he cut that from us? But yeah,
it's sort of like summed up, like when like Dooku's like watching them and just summing it up as like undignified. Yeah, but we're passing over that now.
Yeah, definitely the word.
But it is a really nice character moment for me because again, it works better, like Antoine has been saying, with like the not acknowledging like the TCW, not out of spite, just because like the personal growth that seems to have happened here. In that, like I don't even watch that show religiously, but I know that Anakin's called him Obi-Wan, like just as an equal. I like that this is like supposed to be like sort of the like Obi-Wan acknowledging him as an equal, and I love Anakin's response to that. I really like him in that moment and how much that means to him. I think it's very genuine.
Yeah, and just the revelation of I suppose there's at some point I'm going to have to stop training you, or trying to train you, and it's like yes, you are. But this is what I meant earlier when I said about how there being that little tension behind it, because Anakin is great. It grates him, but he's still in that frame of mind where he understands where everyone's coming from. It's not like it's a major irritant. It's just a case of like, yep, everyone, remember, I'm not your Padawan anymore. And this is where that is sealed off and made apparent, because obviously we get the resolution. And I just really love the moment.
And again, it's just made all the more tragic because you see what could have been. Potentially, and where they could have potentially have gone further from this if things had gone differently. And again, it just really hammers in like just the sheer depth of this tragedy.
The super sad thing to me is that if Anakin had straight up walked up to Obi and told him everything about Padme, everything, I still kind of have faith that things would have turned out right, because I think Obi-Wan would have decided, no, I am not abandoning my friend regardless of what he chooses. It's like either he does the Jedi thing, divorces her and becomes a knight, or he follows his heart, leaves the order to be with her, or maybe he pushes some reform and we start allowing marriage again.
I would take the latter for sure.
Yeah, he would go the Luke route. Is even kind of suggested with the whole, I've always, we pretend I don't know things.
Yeah,
so,
I've always found this to be like the irony of the Jedi, like how they dealt with Anakin was like if he'd felt like he could be more open about, they sort of doomed themselves very inadvertently by treating this issue this way.
Which just goes to show that Kenobi and Siri were right.
Yeah, precisely. I was about to say I completely buy the idea that Obi-Wan would be before the reform, because he and Siri made the point to each other that we'll wait till we become masters and then we'll push for it ourselves. They made that conscious choice. Maybe one day when we're the masters of the council. So it would be perfect for Anakin. He would have that person, that support and that assistance, especially considering Obi-Wan is his voice on the council, his voice in the order. If he started pushing for that kind of reform, people would listen. I'm not sure whether or not it would actually make a difference, but there would be some movement at least.
Well, it may have, and we can get to that later though, because like there is irony charging this moment, or that moment when May specifically chooses not to take Anakin, and his reasons for not doing so are not very Mace-like, but they are very human, ironically. Yeah. But anyway, we'll get to that point when we get to it.
Yep. Anywho. They enter the general's quarters and find a dark figure sitting in a chair that is Chancellor Palpatine, ostensibly chained to his seat, but really he's directing the action.
Yeah,
putting on his weak, feeble old man act.
I'm too weak. Anakin.
Not quite that far, but close to it.
But he looks frightened, which Anakin notes, and I like the response that invokes in Anakin, how that angers and shakes him, because this is an unshakable figure he's looking at right now. This is the one person who it's the reason the Republic supposedly loves him. He is unshakable, he's undefeatable, he is the solid backbone of the Republic. And for Anakin, who's he's also a father figure for. To see that, you can understand why he's registering such an emotional response here. Even if he wasn't Anakin, even if he was just a normal person who wasn't driven by his passions and drive, this reads as believable for me.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, contrasted with Obi-Wan's own quintessential Jedidom, who is right next to him, completely fine. I love this entire sequence for that, actually, how unshakable Obi-Wan is, and completely true Jedi, and how Dooku recognizes that. It would be an insult to call Skywalker a Jedi in this moment, as far as he's concerned. And to an extent, he's kind of right. From what the notes he's paying attention to anyway.
From his standard,
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
right.
Which is what
I love Dooku's line of General Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, gentlemen, turn my use in its loosest possible sense.
Yes,
Right.
I love that. Yeah, I love
Such
that
a
little
good line.
footnote. It's perfect.
I think I like his entrance in here overall better than in the movie, of course. But I think it's a little long-winded for a film. Like you couldn't translate this exactly. Like you would have to pare some of this down. But overall, like the tone of this, I think is a better introduction. Like Dooku basically doesn't have an introduction in that movie. He just walks in and starts fighting, pretty much. Like there's no verbal sparring. It's like, who is this guy again? And why do
he
I
also
care?
doesn't jump off the balcony, do a flip, and then land. Here he just kind of glides down.
Nice nod to the micro series. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
It's perfectly Dooku.
More
as well.
Vader.
Grandiose, but not inefficient. Whereas just leaping and doing a flip is like, what are you doing? Why didn't you just take the stairs?
You can have that flip and then him have criticisms of flipping later.
Precisely, yeah. Even in the fight he's using acrobatics, which is like, what? Why are you so disdainful of acrobatics?
I don't know what that scene was in its original iteration, but that's like one of the most edited down scenes I've ever seen, because it's even different. Like this, book was written like with the script in hand, so he's like taking notes from like the original script. So who knows what that was? The scene is portrayed differently, even in like the cutscenes that are in the video game, if my memory serves me. Like it had more to say, and I don't know exactly what it was meant to be, but it's like all snipped out because reasons. So in the movie, it's very bare bones and just choppy and weird for me. I hate that scene in the movie, but that's just my personal feeling.
Well, I mean, that whole fight overall is actually one of my least favorites.
The first part is definitely
really, really bad. His reaction to
Obi-Wan is like arguably in the way the whole time.
Also, he's a complete moron. He's like, "Here, let me slash you," and no, let's just move my blade over here instead.
That's what I meant.
Which is fine. Like them being in the way is what is supposed to be happening at the beginning of it. But the issue is that it's not in the way that it's choreographed.
If it was Dooku forcing it, sure, but Obi-Wan is just making really stupid decisions in that. So,
but Antoine's right. Antoine's right that like in the prose it makes sense because like they're purposely trying to look bad, but like on screen the way it's choreographed just looks like, what is this?
I love that this was the fix for that. He was like, oh god, they look terrible. Let me fix this. Let me make it in no reason.
I know, and well, the problem is that this is actually something I've discussed in the past. The storyline of Revenge of the Sith would have been, especially the film, would have been vastly improved if the positions of General Grievous and Dooku in the plot were reversed. And it was Grievous in this scene, so that way they could just... Exactly. Because it's like the whole point behind the villain of this fight scene is to basically be a sacrificial lamb to be offered up to Anakin's rage. A throwaway villain like Grievous would have been perfect because it also would have set up a nice little parallel with the Return of the Jedi duel. Anakin standing over the pathetic, wounded cyborg, but instead just coldly executing him because fuck you.
It also would have been interesting to have four blades going up against two other people. Like visually speaking, that would have been very interesting. See how that would have been a better
fight. I agree with that, but it wouldn't have sold as powerful an emotional beat because Grievous is the butcher of billions. He's not humanoid. He's very stubborn. He's broken. It wouldn't have had.
Also, Anakin doesn't have the connection to him, like the
the revenge thing of
they would have needed to have established one prior.
A lot of work would have been put in place to make that fit.
That's actually the other reason why I'm in favor of it, because having his revenge arc aborted would give Anakin another reason to be PO'd at the council, whereas having Kenobi take down Dooku single-handedly would give Kenobi the chance to remind us, hey, this guy's supposed to be a badass Jedi Master. It would allow him to show off how much he's grown since the last movie.
I don't need that person.
I mean, I do feel like you do still get that with Grievous, but I see what you mean. Yeah.
Well, I'll discuss it more later, but I've always kind of felt that Grievous was kind of an ad hoc nemesis, where they're literally just saying, we need a fight to remind the audience that Kenobi's a badass, even though he's gotten his ass handed to him in every other fight. What can you think of? Robot with 4 arms and 4 lightsabers? Okay, good. Let's do that.
It's also so
Palpatine and Obi-Wan has like this very long-winded fight at the end of the movie, though, with Anakin.
Precisely.
So I think Grievous was designed to sell toys and be a new villain that may or may not have been needed. Who could have had all the potential to be a great character and just wasn't, like on screen. Yeah. I'm not anti-Grievous. I'm just anti-execution.
Completely agree.
But moving back to the book, the fight does unfold proper.
Can I say real quick before the fight, like, is one of my favorite Dooku quotes. I've known this quote since I was like 13 when I read the book or whatever for the first time. Unless one of you happens to be carrying Yoda in his pocket,
Yep.
I hardly think I shall need
I
one.
love that
I
line.
love that.
I put that in my
quote.
notes
That
as
is
well.
I love this. I have remembered this for years. Like, I mean, that's like half my life. I've known that quote. That's like embedded in my idea of who Dooku is. I love that quote.
Anyway, it's
we can move
funny,
forward
but
now.
it's also so relevant. You know, it's so poignant. No one in the Jedi is a threat unless you got Yoda with you. You know,
Yeah.
It's so dismissive.
Yeah, it's like
brilliant.
I can hear it's sarcastic and quippy and cheesy almost, and at the same time, it fits well with Christopher Lee's dignified voice. It's perfect for the character. I
it's
love
brilliant.
Well, I also like the nod to Mace as well, because he says specifically that he thinks that Mace would have enjoyed the coming show, like of just the act of a fight, and that is very in line with what Mace, or who Mace is. You know, he is someone who is in love with fighting, and it's something that's the reason why he's created the form that he has, and it's like. That's what's happened to Shatterpoint is, you know, it's like when he's fighting Card Vaster, he's just all about like, I actually like doing this. Is something I like. I know it's not, you know, possibly the greatest Jedi thing.
It also bigs up Dooku because he's saying,
right,
I also appreciate an educated audience. You know, it's,
Right.
I've always enjoyed that.
And he's also right and wrong in an ironic way, because he's actually poised to lose this one, which Mace would have been cheering for. Because like the way this goes really wrong. Like this does not go the way Dooku thinks it's going to go at all. So I love that.
Mm-hmm. And Mace would have liked the show. You know, he would have enjoyed what Anakin and Obi-Wan were setting up, and then, you know, the progression of that fight. I think it's true to say that he would have enjoyed it just on the aspect of like someone who's a spectator of boxing or something like that, or MMA, you know?
For sure. The only problem with that in my head is that he in no way would be a spectator. You know, I can't even envision him hanging back. I know in that context, but it's just funny to imagine him like, can't jump in. He'd just be straight over the banister and jumping in himself.
and then that fight would have been over like ridiculously quickly, by the way. Yeah. Moving on though to the actual fight, I suppose.
Yep.
Love the execution.
It's kind of split. It's kind of split in the two. Well, I mean, three distinct, you know, sections. You know, it starts with Dooku holding the advantage, then the two of the Jedi holding the advantage, and then cuts back to just Dooku and Skywalker.
Dooku and Skywalker after Obi's taken out.
Huh?
I'm pretty sure that this fight takes up the most amount of pages, like of any fight in the book.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny. But I mean, it's all very character based. I like what it says about the characters involved, and it's a way of like doling out like insights into who their characters are and how they operate without just stating it. You're including it in like a moment where they're all participating. It's very readable and rereadable. You know, it's not dry.
Very digestible as well.
Each one has their own time to shine, and it showcases the advantages of each character's individual style in that situation.
Yeah, especially when the fact that they're not using their individual styles initially. You know, the fact that they're diving into all the different kind of forms. Worthy of note, because someone will comment about it if we don't. Ataru is spelt wrong. It's Ataro in this. Yeah, infamously.
Yeah,
consistently.
Yeah. And they call it Ataro in the audio drama as well.
Well, let me ask us what it is. No, these people aren't like actually. They're just working. You know what I mean? They don't really care about that kind of a thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they're just getting paid.
Oh, how do I pronounce this?
Some of them are doing it well. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but
and it was actually quite recent.
In that case, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, because it's only quite recent that they were named. Even, you know, like I mean, you could have easily missed it because it was only like 2 years prior that they were actually like given names.
There's probably some legal binding reason to just read it as it's written as well. Like if you're the voice actor, like read it that way. Like don't change the. I noticed that the only word that's different is like at the end where they go that the story or the beginning, like when he's doing like this story happened a long time ago. There's nothing can be done to change it. Blah blah blah. He goes, it's like this is happening even as you're reading these words. He'll say listening to these words, but that makes sense because it's
right.
Like it's different in my notice.
The other thing I just like commenting about, just commenting about the tactic that Anakin and Obi-Wan use, initially using their less developed forms to kind of sucker Dooku and then abruptly switching over to their primary forms. What I do like is the fact that the forms they're using, like the less developed forms, are still appropriate to their character.
Well, and also it's probably what they were
Dooku.
using when they were using Attack of the Clones. Like it's like the same. He has the same opening. Like they initially said that he had the same. Anakin has the same overhead opening, and that like they were saying, "Oh, we haven't grown. You're gonna like underestimate us. We're gonna do exactly the same thing." And I love to see like the conversation before this hand. Like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna totally just open up with the same thing we did like 3 years ago. He's totally gonna underestimate us. We're gonna just go ham on him, and we're gonna be like, I wonder what that conversation was between them, those two.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they're not in general planners when they're working together anyway. Separate. This is a bit different for Obi-Wan, for example. But yeah, the idea of them sitting down. And, okay, so how are we going to do this? I like the vision of that. But also the fact that this is a very believable thing for Dooku. It makes sense that he's suckered into this. One, because of his elitism, but two, because of his past experience with both of these people.
His reaction when he realized he's been suckered is just gold.
Yeah.
Oh, it's really well written.
The fact that he even used the word suckered and it still fits, because that's not the sort of line that would fit for Dooku in general, but it was so complete. How much
it's
they
the essence of this whole chapter as well, or in the follow-up as well. Like, he has been suckered.
By both
there's no
Jedi and Sith,
two ways around it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I like one of his first moves too, where it talks about him binding Obi-Wan's hand just like by the wrist, and it's like a very kung fu move. And I don't think we ever get to see enough of that in like the visual fights that we have, or the aspect of Anakin using a telekinetic throw against him in the same way that Vader would do later on. Because we've seen Anakin kind of do that, but now you see Dooku acknowledging like, oh man, you actually have like power, like you're being a Jedi right now. It's funny because when Dooku turns it and he feels like he's in danger, he's like, all right, enough playing around, and just uses the Force. So then I'm like thinking like here this whole time, I'm like, why don't they just like open with that? Like, what I mean, what she did with Yoda at first, and then he's like, okay, fine, then we'll go lightsaber. But like, it's like just you guys have like all these powers.
Speaking of the Force, because we didn't actually mention it, the intro when he's walking in and kind of taking their measure and triggering his kind of Force perception. I love the description of everyone involved. Obi-Wan in particular, the kind of translucent window into the open plains.
Luminous.
Yeah, open plains of the Force. I love that. The distinct characteristics each of them have, and it's not just about power. It's about how the power is manifesting. Really, really beautiful. But also the when you said about the table being launched and the Force push, Antoine, when Dooku registers that the Force does this, it's not Anakin. He's detecting the Force is doing something.
Right.
It's Anakin obviously triggering that action, but the way they describe that, Stover really understands the nature of the Force and how it's supposed to be implemented in physical and spiritual essence.
And I really like the idea of when Obi-Wan, when they finally do switch to their primary forms, and Obi-Wan's implementing Sresu, and he's just doing like it's described as like an offensive defensive measure, like, you know what I mean, like it's him just doing defensive parries, but
but they're so bewilderingly fast,
right?
His perception. Like he doesn't even try and strike. He's like, oh,
exactly. Like, it's the weirdest kind of combination of he's being offensive with his defensive posturing, because he's like, yeah, I don't even want to stick my saber in that.
It's the speed he's moving.
You can actually.
It's kind of like when a peacock kind of opens its like feathers in order to create that.
Yeah, it's the threat of an attack rather than any attack coming. That's got Dooku on guard.
It's like it's almost like the Vapad ready stance too, like where it's like this thing that's not doing anything to you right now, but you don't want to enter that fray. It's like and you can actually do this in the game. You can actually just do like a defensive thing where you're just like cycling your blade, but if something comes toward it, it gets hurt, it takes damage. So it's interesting in that way too. It's kind of fun.
Which is another like way of the book, hammering in the fact that in terms of developed ready combat skill, Anakin and Obi-Wan very much are Dooku's, I would say, equals in a lot of ways.
When it comes to pure technical skill, if not the overall package, absolutely.
Right,
and he himself recognizes that. He's seeing the growth that these two have gone through.
Which is great, because the movie, again, doesn't support that, which is irritating.
Yeah.
Doesn't support what notion?
That they are on his level.
Oh,
well, at least it doesn't.
Makes you feel
it doesn't spell it out. I think what he's saying, like, because there's many people that would not hold Obi-Wan on that level at all. Like, even on the basis of that.
He legit resorted to like basically cheating and using the Force when he's like, "Oh, I am not like by the time I actually get through that guard, I will be extremely tired." Like, you know what I mean? Like,
if he gets through it in the first place,
right?
Yeah.
As
well as it's also just down to the fact that what this fight establishes is that even when Dooku actually has things going in his favor, his old age is still a problem. He's still burning through his energy. Even before they switch their styles, he's saying, well, this dumb show is getting tiresome, not to mention tiring, because the dark power that served him only went so far. And now they've switched over to their primary styles, and he's literally between a rock and a hard place. Anakin, the Gemso hammer, with Obi as the Sarisu anvil. And basically from this point on, he's basically just, well, in a much more composed manner, but shitting bricks, constantly saying fuck.
Which again is something that so many people choose to ignore, and I don't understand why, because the book makes it so clear, but whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, his farce has suddenly, inexplicably spun from humorous to deadly serious, and was tumbling rapidly toward terrifying. Like he totally goes through the ringer of like, oh crap, you're pretty good.
Would
oh
have
my God,
lost if
I'm
he
going
didn't
to die.
cheat. Yeah, he would have lost.
Yeah, it's a long way from his entrance to the room of like, I wouldn't do to engage two Jedi with his pants on fire, and I was like, yeah, well, we get that anyway, don't we?
That's what I'm saying is like, that's why I think it's ironic, because like Mace would have had something else to enjoy had he been like some kind of spectator, because this moment here.
It was just a smug grin
what
from him.
I wonder what happens if he legit would have died right now. You know what I mean? Like, he practically almost dies himself. Like, if he just died right there, like, what is Palpatine's plan at that point? Like, does he go, oh,
Palpatine just sitting there like,
there goes my plan.
I like the idea of him just sitting like, oh, okay.
Good job, y'all.
I guess you can rescue me now. I'll come up with something next year.
Next year. I'll make this war go on a little longer.
I'm still Chancellor, right? I'll figure something out. Yeah.
Well, that might have been his back door. Grievous might have been his back door to be like, okay, I'll let him escape or something. Or,
Grievous, help! But yeah, he resorts to cheating by calling his super battle droids, very much like in the film, to break them up.
Yeah, a gentleman isn't above cheating.
It's a little different though, because he's literally like, guards, come help me. It's what?
He's completely shitting himself. Yeah.
Further sells in the fact, maybe.
Yeah, he's shitting in his.
Not as good as you might think. Yeah, but no. So from there, it plays out in a similar way. Kenobi destroys the droids, where Skywalker follows him up onto the rampart, and we get the other half of the duel, where he resolves to disable Kenobi in order to isolate Skywalker.
I love the descriptions of the boots to the face in this sequence. There's quite a lot of them.
Very good.
It's like white hot fire, like erupting in the face. Oftentimes, very cool. And also rare, because you rarely see the kind of roundhouse kicks to the face in these duels. Dooku's a fan of them, it seems.
Yeah, those Rancor leather boots pack a punch.
Yep.
Yeah. So although it is similar to the movie, the way he disables the characters is marginally different. He doesn't instead of choking Kenobi in this sequence, he just blasts him back. And what's interesting is like in the film you're led to believe it's the choke that knocks him out, but the book specifically notes that it's just the only reason he was knocked out is because he landed on his head.
Yeah, and the steel broke first. I love that. It's like his head is harder than the bloody steel plating. I love it.
He has even a note about that. It's like apparently his head was strong, like harder than. But then it's like, oh, also you can explain that. Like it's just that he's got Jedi powers.
Yeah, it's the Force shield.
Reinforced.
It's literally the Force shield around him.
Right.
Force shields are like more physically durable. I mean, that's just how it is.
Especially Obi-Wan. Can't break him.
And then after that, we get a little sequence, which I mentioned earlier. After he disables Kenobi, he immediately gets kicked in the face by Skywalker, tumbles head over heels back and lands. And when he looks up at Anakin glaring down at him, he kind of has a little dream/future see moment, kind of like the one Matt mentioned earlier.
Yeah, he says something like, like a dream he'd never actually had before. Yeah, it seems there's some odd symmetry here.
Troublingly
Yes, I love that. Yeah, I love that.
It's like the idea that it's been like deja vu, even though you haven't felt this way before. It's like opposite deja vu. It's like opposite vu, whatever that is. It's just like this weird thing. And I love his descriptions of things like that. He's really great with that sort of mercurial aspect of like destiny and the Force and how it relates to you.
And even the idea that even now the Force is trying to save him, but he's so blinded to it by his own ways that he's
nothing you can do at this point.
Precisely. The Force seemed to be busy somewhere else.
Yeah,
that's what he actually said.
Yeah, precisely. This is the point where
keying him into the truth, which is cruel.
Yeah,
hey, you're done, buddy.
Precisely, it's the cruelty of the dark side. But this is the point where yes, he even mentioned in the fight, they couldn't possibly win. They're guided by the Force. He used the Force. Like, yeah, you do, but this is what happens when you do. You can't trust it. It will only serve you if you serve it. So it's like it's that balance of the light and dark, the pros and cons of each.
The other thing is just the fact that trying to control the Force in that very direct manner has the other limitation of Dooku's a Force capacitor, not a Force channeler. that means that he's basically just creating a personal well of power that he parcels out however he pleases. But the problem is that once that well runs dry, there's nothing left because he's not channeling the energy. He's pulling it into himself and holding it there like a battery.
Very much the opposite of Obi-Wan.
His fatigue, which really takes a toll on him at this point when Skywalker is really drawing on his rage to drive him back.
The hate
but then
flow through you.
Yeah.
But then
not the we do get a brief moment.
It's so cartoonish.
Yeah. But then we get a brief moment of him turning the tables on Anakin.
I like the description of Anakin like shying away from the fury that he feels. Like we actually don't just get him just raging straight off the bat. Like Dooku senses that, he could be much greater than what he's even doing now, which is already about to get me killed. But it's something holding back, and that's what he actually hones onto. That's what he latches onto for his taunting when he's like, "Oh, okay, like you're not actually that great." And he's also trying to like just find a crack so that like if I can have cracks for a moment, maybe I can turn this around. Though that changes for him, not because of Anakin himself, which I think in the movie it was him getting angry and then pushing off. It's Palpatine saying, giving him a lesson.
Yeah.
I love the sheer incredulity.
I love how it describes what exactly is going on in his head, where it's like he's afraid of what he could potentially become because he doesn't know really what his upper limits are. So it's kind of like, he's angry, but he doesn't want to get angry, so he gets afraid, but the fear feeds the anger, and then it just becomes this cycle. And it even Dooku describes it as again, we get one of those like lore moments, I think it was like the proverbial Corellian multipede. Once he starts
tripped him up.
That was one that I was like, okay.
Tripped him up.
Yeah, but it's the same reference. The thing as well is that Sidious is tapping into that, so you get the intuitive nature of him connected to Skywalker still, even now. But also, my favorite part is the incredulity of Dooku. Is like, what are you doing? it's like, can you not?
Have you lost your mind?
Yeah, it's like, whose side are you on anyway? And then it's like, oh wait, I love that it's such an
I just remembered
flash of realization, and that's how the chapter concludes.
Treachery is the way of the Sith.
Yeah, it's such a perfect ending line, and the fact that it's a callback as well to the previous assertion by him. It was smug before, now it is very much not.
It was at this moment that Dooku knew.
Yeah, it's the ultimate moment, of someone realizing they'd fucked up.
It kind of brings me back to a line from Lord of the Rings that Gandalf said in relation to Saruman, which was, "The treacherous are oft fearful of treachery." Well, I find that that's actually one end of two extremes. Either the treacherous are super, super paranoid because they're expecting other people to use their methods, or they're not paranoid enough because they somehow think that they're the people who invented lying.
Littlefinger in a nutshell. Yep. Spoiler alert.
Yep, perfectly fit.
Probably saying spoiler alert actually
been so much better than it was.
It should have been.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Anyway.
I actually was livid even though I wanted to see what happened.
Everyone wanted to see what happened.
But the way in which it happened, I was like, not like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have absolutely no idea what you get to reference.
It's a great scene, but it's completely misplaced and executed oddly. Yeah.
Okay.
But the opening, I like the opening a lot because it has this grandiose thing of like this is a story that has already happened. You cannot change anything about it. We have that same theme going on with Dooku saying, "Oh, this is the depth of me." Now it's just a matter of like having it happen, or even Anakin's having that same feeling as well. And it's just the idea of the foretelling.
It's a beautiful piece of prose, which like really encapsulates the feeling of meeting one's destiny. You know what I mean?
Jedi meeting your destiny because you can see these moves ahead. You're playing chess with your body. You know what I mean? Like you already know what's about to happen seconds in advance. So it's crazy.
Even the double nature of
relates to each of his.
Sorry, even the double nature of the chapter's title, Jedi Trap. I love that it is a Jedi trap, but it's not for the Jedi. They're the bait. The twist of that for Dooku's when it's focusing on Dooku's mentality and his viewpoint, it's perfect because the flip really is what sends him through a loop. He did not see this coming in any way, shape, or form, and that was what he was reveling in before. He was reveling in the fact that no one else was seeing anything.
At the same time, though, the minute that like the veil is lifted, he sees it in all its horrifying clarity. Like he sees it for everything, but this doesn't matter anymore. Like there's nothing to be done about it. Can't change it. And the sad thing about like it's a stupid line. Only a Sith deals in absolutes. Like that's ridiculous. It's a self-defeating statement. But the idea that you could be like an absolutist, like that absolutist point of view is really sad. Like with Dooku's final moments where he goes, I'm all that I am, like it doesn't matter at all. Like the entire point of my existence has been for like a stepping stone for this brat. That's not true, but he believes it. Like there's something really sad and melancholy and pitiable about that. Like you've lived 83 years and you think it boils down to this, like that's all it is for you. And it's sad. I can buy that he's in the throes of despair in that way, but it's objectively not true.
Yeah, you're not. You're the sum of your parts. It's not about the one moment at the end of your life. It's not all building up to your death. It's everything you do along the way, and it's something he's always misunderstood. It's something that Dooku's never fully appreciated: the journey and the importance of the small things. They give me my rose. I love that line.
Yeah. It's just the issue is he was believing he was going to be so much more than he was, that when his world just comes crashing down, it hits him just so hard.
Well, the other thing is the fact that Dooku hasn't been thinking about things in terms of I am Dooku, let's live my life. He's always been thinking my life is the story of Dooku. So it's like everything's got to follow the rules of grand sweeping epics. And as far as it's kind of his way of trying to rationalize his death within that context, trying to frame his death as a true tragic end to a great story. But the problem is that viewing it from that lens just does not work, because from that lens, he is right. His purpose in life is to be Anakin Skywalker's first murder. And it's like, no.
There is more to life than this.
His perspective is swayed. I think like when you have like a death scene, I think personal philosophy and perspectives on like what death is, like they can change your takeaway from any death scene moment. But ultimately, in this particular moment, to me, it doesn't matter how you judge Dooku or like where he's going or what's going on or what the sum of him is. The tragedy here is how he judges himself. I think it's really sad, and it makes me pity him despite everything he's done.
Yeah.
It also just makes you wish all the harder we had Plagueis's perspective in his novel when he was dying. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That, for me anyway, that was like the missing ingredient of that entire section of the book. I needed that, especially for a character with that motive.
I like the imagery too of the flashes that Anakin got. It reminded me a bit of his fight with Ventress on Yavin 4, where he's like pounding, and then you get like the Wada slap, and you get like Shmi like in her dying words. But then you have that him channeling that, for his defeat of Dooku.
I also really like the way it's described somebody, again, because he never really reaches that chosen one status for me on camera. The idea of someone being like this walking sort of the Virgins in the Force, right? That you can be powerful enough that your decisions become reality. Right. Like that's like transcendent Force user. Like that's beyond even Yoda and Palpatine. But it's something that I really wanted to see him be, which he's not. But I love the way it's described.
This is like the closest we ever really get to it.
I think it's this and stuff that is off page and off screen, which is him with Operation Nightfall, are the two moments that he has like the most clarity, even though it might be with the dark side. I think those are his best two moments, period, in his whole career.
Mm-hmm. And even then, there's a lot about Nightfall we don't really know about, because we don't ever get
the most
that
we know
is
the Revenge of the Sith video game. That's it. Like that's all we really have, and that's a video game.
Yeah.
So a lot of that video game actually is really a lot of that video games is actually pretty cool.
But
it's underrated.
It's definitely overplayed on the whole scale factor, because boss. You have to have a boss battle. Sindralik did not go out like that, as much as we may have wanted him to. In some ways,
unfortunately,
but with like a one-handed bet.
Yeah. But speaking of one-handed, Anakin, gets revenge for his hand, which we discussed earlier, takes both of Dooku's. And I actually kind of like the whole description. Anakin thinks Dooku should lose the hand he took.
He decides, yeah.
Yep,
decides. Yep. Sorry.
And he goes one further as well. I love that. It's a visual, physical example of how already you're going too far. You can lose that perspective in a heartbeat. And also the way Dooku's seeing Anakin in this, there's a thermonuclear furnace where his heart is supposed to be. That perception of him, realizing the true nature of Anakin and his potential, and how he's just unwittingly unlocked it, however briefly. and sealed his own fate. Everything about this is from Dooku's personal viewpoint, even when it's coming from Anakin kind of thing, because Anakin's more Force perspective, and the focus is on Dooku as a human character. Until the reaction, obviously, Anakin's comes afterwards when he's actually reacting to all of this.
So he takes his hands, and then we get the
deviation from the films where like Dooku sort of tries to plead, which I approve of this not being in the movie. I think like it's not in character for him to beg. So like that.
And what's funny is it totally was going to be in the movie, but I think it was Christopher Lee himself who stated, "I don't think." Yeah.
I understand them chopping that out. I just don't understand why the whole scene is so choppy, like, you know, like with being edited out, like the former conversation. But yeah, like that, I agree, doesn't need to be in there. That wasn't in the original film and treatment that Stover would have written this with in hand. Yeah.
And also, like I said, it is so out of character. It diminishes him. I know that, given not just in the context of his character, but in the context of the prose here, he is very self-aware in this moment. He's currently looking back on his life. He's currently looking back on the sum of his, the grand total of what he now is, what he ultimately, the only purpose he's effectively served from his perspective. He isn't going to be begging. He's going to be maybe trying to talk his way out of it. Maybe trying to connect with Anakin in some way or on some level, manipulative wise. But he's not going to be pegging. It doesn't.
I guarantee.
I mean, I almost feel like it would have been stronger if he did just say nothing in the book, and everything we heard from him was just in his head,
internal monologue.
Yeah,
like, it's like all he does is
like
just
so broken that he can't even speak.
Just a breath.
It's like a real reaction.
Yeah, I guarantee.
So you're stunned to shock.
The only reason
he just had his hands cut off. He is in shock.
Yeah. The only reason that Stover would have written it this way is because that's the way it was in the script. And I guarantee the minute he saw the film and saw that they cut that, I'd go, oh, well, shit, I didn't have to put that in the book. Oh, well. Like, that was like, I guarantee that's something he would have been like, oh, it could have been better.
Yeah.
And then we get the whole, do it moment.
You're right.
Do it. Yeah, never gets old, that one.
Something else the book doesn't have that the movie has. Palpatine doesn't have the moment.
Yeah, it also doesn't have duck face Palpatine.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Oh lord.
But I do like the other thing after he said is the Palpatine said, "Invisible now within the stark shadow of the general's chair." Like the imagery of him being a shadow. Like it's good because usually you don't have imagery is more stark in film, but having it in prose is very nice to have as well. And I also like the line he has about revenge being the foundation of justice, because it is a true statement that, like, if boiled down, justice is about, it's not as vicious as what the connotation of revenge is, but it is.
Civilized people draw a line between the two, but that is where its roots are. That's right. That's objectively true. You cannot argue that. Yeah.
Right. Boiled down to its absolute roots, the only difference is the emotion. Everything, all the high-minded philosophy comes afterwards into this when it gets to the whole proper civilization level in society. Yeah.
Well, it's like I personally like to think back to a line from Batman Begins, which is justice is about harmony, revenge is about making yourself feel better. I agree that the foundation of justice is revenge. It's about balancing the scales. The difference is revenge is all about balancing the internal scales, doing something to that guy that you yourself feel is of equal worth to what he did to you, which might result in disproportionate retribution. Whereas justice is saying, no, we have to decide this as a group. What is an appropriate punishment for what this guy did? We can't just let his victim brutalize him.
It's about morality, not satisfaction.
Unless you're Hammurabi, right?
Disproportionate retribution is the way of the Sith.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very true.
It doesn't quite pack the same punch.
It's the problem with the Sith in general. Boil everything down to the absolute roots, and that's all they do. They take things down to their fundamentals, as is their way, and they don't look at the importance of the details. They just see, oh, this is all false. This has all been piled on by society. These aren't real. And it's like, you're right, but that doesn't matter. Look at all the good this does.
The other thing is the fact that the Sith and Darksiders in general are completely obsessed with purpose. Nothing can ever exist purely for its own sake. It has to have a reason for existing. It's like the Jedi, the Jedi can't be allowed to just be a monastic order that just meditates on the Force and does nothing else. We have to use that power and exert our will and change things because that's our purpose. Our purpose is to be gods.
That's the ironic thing about the Sith. That's the ironic thing is like their ways free you to enjoy the things in life that the Jedi don't often preclude you from enjoying, but they're not able to because Sith.
Because they've sacrificed so much of their humanity. It's like Darth Vader, confirmed to be the second wealthiest, most powerful individual in the galaxy. Can he enjoy that? No, not really. Why? Because he's locked in a scary cyborg suit, can't eat food, can't drink. Well, he technically can, but he doesn't. It's like all of those pleasures of the flesh that you and I can indulge in, like a lovely afternoon tea. Vader can't do that.
Even outside of Vader, though, even if he was perfectly whole by the end, you still can't enjoy it. You can maybe appreciate the physical element of it, but you can't truly enjoy the philosophy, the mental appreciation, because there is none. It's like, oh wow, the wind's blowing in my face. The wind's blowing in my face. There's no, I enjoy this personal experience. Why would you? It doesn't serve a purpose.
Because ultimately every single thing about them revolves around their power and the Force. It's like I've said this in the past. If you took Yoda, stripped him of his Force sensitivity, would he stop being a Jedi? No. If you took Palpatine, stripped him of his Force sensitivity, would he stop being a Sith? Yes.
Anyone would. Anyone with sense. Any Sith would.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the end of this part of the book.
Well, I like the one part where Mace Windu, he said a little thing with him about Mace Windu saying that he would never give a second chance.
There's no such thing as a second chance.
Yes, right. I love that line.
It's like,
I love that.
Oh my god, that's such a, and it's like he knows him because of Shatterpoint, but it's just like yes, that's totally what Mace. That's
yeah,
he is.
Such a great, and it's not about not having forgiveness. It's about the reality of it's always a first chance, given for a different reason. I love that. It's a metaphysical comment rather than a moral one. Brilliant.
It's a great quote, and it's like a truism, and it also undoes that stupid they're only Sith deal in absolutes, because that's an absolute statement.
Yeah.
unless Mace Windu is a Sith, I'm just saying.
Oh my.
Yeah.
But then the chapter's just capped off with the little description.
One other thing that I think is worth mentioning is the bit where Palpatine tries to talk Anakin into abandoning Obi-Wan, and Anakin has that moment where he looks at Palpatine and doesn't like him at all, because it's really interesting, because this is like one of those rare moments of true insight where Anakin for a split second sees Palpatine for what he truly is, but then he forces that down because he prefers to cling to the idea of Palpatine as his father figure.
When you compare this to the movie, I love how Anakin does the same things, but he's portrayed as having a brain.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what this book is. It's the same story. It's the same foundation. It's nothing drastically changed. Except you just get the insight and you get more depth with it.
It's about the recognition. It's the thought, which to an extent that's reliant on the material, on the medium. Getting that insight, that mentality of Anakin channeling channel straight to the audience. But there are ways you can do it in film, and they just really didn't. Definitely one of my favorite books still. Looking forward to getting to the rest of it.
Oh yeah, no, very much so.
Without question.
Easily top 5 for Star Wars, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I guess we're wrapping up now, right?
Yeah, we're wrapping up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Callan, take us out.
Any closing thoughts before I do, or are we all finished with this one?
Evan, you were gonna say something, right?
That was nothing.
Okay.
This is probably one of the best ironically, considering that the lightsaber duel is such crap in the film, it's probably one of the best lightsaber duels in a Star Wars novel, because the descriptions are just really so evocative, and it gives you so much insight into the 7 forms. It's like almost every single form, like almost all of them, is mentioned in this fight scene. The only ones that are left out are Nyman and Juyo, but all the others are mentioned, and that's so interesting.
And
that is top 10 without a doubt.
Yeah.
It's naturally what would happen in a fight too. Like you wouldn't just be seeing one form and one other form. Like they've been learning all these things. It's a combat is a flow. Like if you even see like MMA fighters, they're mixing, the types of forms they know. It's not just one going at another at all times.
And
exactly.
There's personal characters with stakes tied to what's happening as well. It's an actual moment in the narration, or the narrative rather.
Yep. And well, it is a personal struggle, which The book delivered on, the movie didn't.
Sums up the two Revenge of the Sith versions in general, really, doesn't it? The movie didn't, the book did. Anyway,
I mean, it bears mentioning that like the movie can't be all that the book is, but the book is just so much better, guys. Like if you haven't read it, please do read it. Like I mean, obviously, they can just go so much deeper than any film can, but still,
for us, this is.
And if you're allergic to reading, there's an audiobook.
Yes,
which is also excellent,
one.
as we've mentioned.
Yeah. So
you have no excuse.
It even includes Star Wars music, so you're not missing out on that.
Excellent. Yeah. Indeed.
Anyhow.
So with that said, I guess that's everything we want to talk about with part 1. We don't know how many parts are to come, guys. It depends on how much we have to say on each section of the rest of the book, but there will be at least 2 coming. I hope you've enjoyed, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section based on anything that we haven't covered or that you want to cover in greater detail. I'm Retty4, and I still don't have an outro.
That's right. And I'm Graded91. Goodbye.
Evan Nova 95. We hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
People say when the Force closes a door, it opens a viewport. Jensrai 1 signing off.
Antoine Bandele, peace, love, and may the Force be with you always.
Goodbye.